Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go ahead and get this committee of the whole meeting started. The time is now 7:30 on September 17th. Before we start, I do want to read a little forewarning here before we open up the floor after presentations for each agenda item. The floor will be open to the audience for 20 minutes to address the City Council on matters that are on the agenda after the City Council discusses them with staff. We ask that persons wishing to address the City Council keep their comments to 5 minutes in length. Comments must be addressed to the Council as a whole through the Mayor, and profanity may not be used in any form. So, diving right in, why don't we get to the fiscal year 2020 budget discussion. Ms. Gallagher or Barry, I don't know if you have anything to kick it off with. Otherwise, Melissa?
We just have a PowerPoint, and then obviously as we continue making the appointments with each of the City Council members, and this is item number 1, and you will see it again in October, and obviously if we need it in November. But at this point in time, I do turn it over to Finance Director Melissa Gallagher. We have a detailed PowerPoint just to go over in the basics.
Thank you, Mr. Kronstock. And Mr. Mayor and City Council, tonight we are presenting the 2020 proposed budget. And we're going to go through a PowerPoint presentation. Just a couple of reminders before we get started. In the council packet itself, we do have a summary. And on the city's website, you will find the city's budget under the homepage under the Transparency tab. So as we begin, we always like to mention that one of our key documents that we do produce as a city is the budget. And it is our key financial planning document. And it does guide us through our entire decision-making process. It is a snapshot of just 1 year, but we do take a look at many years. The budget does focus on fiscal sustainability and sound financial management. It is the cornerstone of what we do here at the city. The city does communicate financial information not only through the city's audit, which we do produce once a year, but also through the budget and the capital plan and any kind of monthly financial reports that we do produce as well. We're very proud of the fact that in the last year we were reaffirmed from our credit rating agency, Standard & Poor's, at an AA+, and they cite that the city does have very strong budget flexibility, liquidity, and strong budgetary performance. Moody's also did reaffirm last year our AA3 rating, again, very, very important to the city, based on our reserve levels and also the strong capacity to meet our financial obligations. Both agencies do monitor our city's funds and our pension funds. And typically those rating surveillance calls take place November for Moody's and sometime in the year Standard & Poor's, but they do not give you notice. Our budget calendar and process does begin. As soon as you finish one budget, you start another one. So January is the kickoff. But when I say we're looking at just 1 year, we're looking throughout 5 years, 10 years ahead as well. From January to May each year, our departments provide their requests to the city manager and the finance director. And we do meet one-on-one with each department throughout that entire process. As you know, at this year, the June 18th Committee of the Whole meeting, staff presented and discussed with the City Council several items. We presented the city's audited financial results for 2018. Our city's auditors were here to do that, Lauterbach and Amon. We also presented the fund balance reallocation, which typically after the year is finished, staff will come back if levels are available to request for transfers of reserves. And this year was one of those years. The 2020 budget planning calendar was also included. Budget parameters were also discussed in that packet, and the proposed tax levy amounts for police, fire, and IMRF. We also did present the working draft scenario, which is also included in this budget, for the 2019 property tax levy, which funds the 2020 budget. Following that, at the June 25th the City Council meeting, City Council approved Resolution 19R77, which amended the budget, which did reallocate reserves for 2019 for $500,000 for police pension, $500,000 for fire pension, and $100,000 for IMRF. Those transfers have been made, and that is all to assist in funding unfunded obligations for those pension funds. In addition to that, that resolution then also included $400,000 as a reserve for the working draft scenario, which is in the budget. From June until September, the 2020 budget was completed. which is in your council or in your the city website. At the August 13th City Council meeting, we did release the CIP, which is a 5-year financial forecast and capital improvements plan. That was then discussed at the August 20th COW meeting, Committee of the Whole meeting. At the September 10th meeting, the 2020 proposed budget was released with the City Council packet. Government transparency is extremely important to the City of Rolling Meadows. Our Government Transparency tab is listed straight on our homepage at www.cityrm.org. We're very proud of the fact that not only are our budgets out there, but all our audits, capital plans, and many, many other items. There are printed copies available to any City Council members that do request one, and we do have a printed copy at our library at 310 Martin Lane. Coming up tonight, as we're going through this now, we're discussing the proposed budget. After this meeting, as September 24th, there is a Truth in Taxation public hearing. Hearing notices are published in a local newspaper for the libraries and city's tax levy, and this is per state statute. The city manager and the finance director are in the process of completing our initial one-on-one budget meetings with city council members and the mayor. At the October 8th City Council meeting, we also will be having a public hearing on our budget, and that's not only for the city's budget, but for the library's budget as well, and that's also per state statute. At the October 15th Committee of the Whole meeting, we will also have another budget meeting discussion as well, a public meeting to discuss the budget. And just as a footnote, as a reminder, the City Council is in charge of the library's tax levy, so it is adopted by the City Council, but their library's budget is actually approved by their board, and all the City Council does here at the city is actually accept the library's budget. The City Council's meetings that follow will have ordinances and resolutions to be approved by the City Council. And per the schedule we've got right now, November 26th City Council meeting will have the approval of the budget and the acceptance of the library's budget. And typically we try to get all of these things done early because we have lots of filings with Cook County and the state of Illinois. And all of this is and listed in the packet and also in the city's budget. We keep it as a snapshot budget planning calendar, but it's good to go through all of those deadlines and requirements. The proposed budget document itself has several sections. We do have a table of contents. The budget overview includes a list of city officials, our budget planning calendars mentioned, our budget process. We have a written summary. You will see differences between the adopted and the budget, proposed budget when it becomes adopted, because we do have changes throughout the process. We have lots of excellent profile information and other information. Starting on page 24, we have the budget summaries, which includes the property tax levy and all the other summaries. Starting on page 60, we have budgets by fund, which includes all of the budgets by fund. And then the appendix, starting on page 160 through, includes lots of good information about the basis of accounting, our financial policies, our fund balance policies, and we have a vehicle roster for our current fleet, and acronyms and glossary. We're very proud of the fact not only do we receive awards for our audit, our CAFR, our Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, but we also received, for the last several years, our Government Finance Officers Association Award, which is called the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award from GFOA. It does recognize the fact that we take their standards and adhere to them. Our credit rating agency looked very favorably on this. We thought we'd just take a moment to discuss fund structure, which is all set by government accounting rules. They are grouped, and we won't go through all the acronyms right now, but this chart gives you at a high-level group of how they're structured. The general fund is our largest operating fund. It is typically a government unit will just have one general fund. It does include and account for all of the major activities that the city provides for its residents and business owners. We have our government administration, IT is in there, community events, public safety, police and fire, finance, economic development, and many, many others, including community events. As with all of our funds, the general fund is audited by our city's auditors, and we have many other audits that go on throughout the year. Our other funds listed in this slide and also detailed in the budget itself. We have one debt service fund that accounts for the 2012 general obligation bond. Our most recent bond issuances for 2018 and 2019 are accounted for either in or both into the fire stations fund and utilities fund. We have two special revenues funds, the E911 fund and the motor fuel tax fund. Just as a reminder that these goods and services that are provided in these funds are required to be followed by different state statutes. Our capital and projects funds, our fire stations fund, are both our TIF funds for Kirchhoff Road and Golf Road, and our local road fund. And all of these are paid for are used to pay for capital expenditures. Just a couple footnotes. These funds that I'm mentioning here, the police seizure fund, the escrow fund, our foreign fire insurance fund, and any of our pension funds, those are displayed and reported on and audited by our city auditors, but these funds are included only in our audit and not in our budget because we do not set their budgets. Our enterprise funds, so we have two, and they are used to account for business-type activities, although we are not a business. But the goods and services that we provide to the public, we provide so with a fee. And the city has two of those funds, and they're called enterprise funds. The utilities fund, which accounts for water, sewer, and stormwater, and also accounts for all the operating debt and capital. And then we have the refuse fund, which accounts for all of the refuse and recycling services. Internal service funds, and if you think of it as those funds that service our departments and our other funds, they do collect funds or monies through cost allocation or chargebacks, as we know, from various departments and funds. And they pay for the health insurance, the liability insurance for the city, or garage or fleet management, vehicles and equipment, and building and land, and operating capital items. I thought it would be helpful to describe or detail what's the difference between chargebacks and transfers. It's a question that comes up. Starting on page 53 of the 2020 budget, you will see a detailed review of all of the city's transfers and chargebacks. And again, our ad hoc capital improvement committee members know that we have spent some time looking at those just to ensure that the cost allocation is there to fund those important activities. We also track those individually by GL account number, and they are reconciled to the general ledger and audited by the city's auditors. So a transfer, or interfund transfer, as sometimes they're called, is one transfer from one fund to another. As an example, that would be our general fund transfer for annual debt service payment for a debt service fund for the 2012 bond. Chargebacks, however, are different, and they accumulate funds to allocate toward those departments, as mentioned. An example would be a healthcare expense chargeback from the general fund over to the health insurance fund. This is also from the 2020 proposed budget, showing the interfund transfers. Typical to how we have approached this in years past, we do have required transfers, such as the debt service fund transfer. And I won't go through the entire list here, but we'll get into that in just a moment as well. We only have one interfund loan that's outstanding, and it's on the transfers page detailed. And there is a repayment for this interfund loan, and it is classified as a transfer, so it can be called one or the other. This interfund loan does repay a former interfund loan from the general fund to the vehicle and equipment replacement fund years ago. So back several years ago, the Vehicle and Equipment Replacement Fund actually paid the general fund, and now the general fund is repaying that at $100,000 each year. Beginning in 2016, it's a 10-year repayment. At this point, that's the amount that we're paying back to the Vehicle and Equipment Replacement Fund. Just as an overall summary, there are lots of detailed information within the budget itself, but we thought just high level to provide a basic overview. You will see much devoted to capital improvement projects in the budget. There are some great detailed summary pages on that information, but really the commitment to providing as much infrastructure investment is in the budget. The overall fund balances are strong within the budget. And right now, we're in fund balance range for the general fund about 24.8% or 25% rounding. And we only have one negative fund right now, which we are aware of, and it has been noted in our audit, the TIF number 2 across the street, the Kirchhoff Road and Owl. that is projected to become positive over the life of its term. The property tax is dealing with primarily the pensions, but of course there are funds devoted to the other items as well. We are facing a lot of uncertainty as we keep cautioning and understanding what comes through from the state of Illinois. We are also looking and monitoring any threats to local distributed fund income from the state of Illinois and any other items that might come up. And that's one thing we take a close look at. And I know the city council and the mayor and city manager monitors those things quite closely. Our fund balance policies are in range and are met based on our policy parameters. And we did include, for the city's 60th anniversary coming up for 2020, an additional amount, 65th anniversary. Thank you, City Manager Krumstak. $25,000 additional for next year, and that's in the community events. Our year-over-year change for revenues is about 1.6% year-over-year change. So we're estimating right now an additional $500,000 plus for the general fund in terms of revenues, and expenditures just under 2% increase, 1.4%. And typically, we try to let you know what that is, and that really is attributed to the pensions and contractual items that are in the general fund. We have this shown in our executive summary, but it really does highlight our overall look to the budget. Investment in capital and technology, public safety, economic and business development, zoning and land use planning, community events, utility rate stabilization, fiscal stability, and pension funding, and looking at reserves. That's what this budget discusses and talks about. This is always one that comes up in discussions, and we have residents who come into the front counter and ask us questions over the phone. What's the share of our tax bill? What comes back to the city? We say about 16 cents of each dollar is related back to the property tax bill. Most of it's schools, as we know. This debt service payment chart is now with the 2018 and 2019 bonds going out to 2039, and it is also listed in the budget itself. As a reminder, there are two resolutions that did amend the 2019 budget to include the new debt service schedules for 2018 and 2019. Moving on to the property tax levy overview. Just a couple of reminders in terms of the overall property tax, which is always useful to remember. Cook County levies in a year in arrears. It's always one of those things that when we put together our audit, even, we have to remember that in our back pages for a statistical section. You have to have sometimes a tax levy year, sometimes a fiscal year. So when we're thinking about that, whenever we're talking about our levy year, that levy year funds the next year's budget. So for the 2019 levy, tax levy, that's going to fund the 2020 budget. Property taxes are paid to Cook County by property owners in two installments, one in spring and one in fall. And we reconcile those property tax receipts that come back to the city monthly, and those are audited by our city auditors each year. We also have many filings, one in the fall or winter time when the budget is adopted in December with Cook County. And then we have multiple filings throughout the year and submissions to the Cook County. And the city's levy is a dollar amount and not a percentage. It's always good to look at that as well. So just in specific to the general fund, it's good to look at the overview. Some of these questions come up when we are speaking with residents and letting them know what does your tax levy look like. The tax levy comprises about 1/3 of the overall general fund revenues. When excluding pensions, it's about 18%. And when we're just looking at the individual line items, and we'll get to that in just a moment, but when you're looking at the individual line items, particularly for public safety, about 20% of the city's property tax levy funds their actual budgets, because their budgets excluding pensions are about $8 to $9 million. For the public works line item, it's about 5% when you're just looking at their budgets in particular for the general fund. And then we have to remember that the majority of what the property tax bill funds are pensions. About 60% of the overall tax levy is attributed to funding pensions. In the proposed budget and in the packet, We do have the working draft scenario, and as we indicated prior to this, part of that information has been reviewed at several meetings in June, at the June Committee of the Whole meeting, at the June 25th City Council meeting, with a resolution that included some use of reserves approved by resolution. I wanted to take just a moment to review this. We'll kind of go back and forth. One of the things that we want to take a look at are the individual line items. So when we look at the levy, we're looking at several prior years to give us a sense of what the prior years were, and we have a column that says proposed tax levy, and then we have a column that says the dollar change and percent change. We do levy for dollars and not percentages, and in this proposal, when we look at the overall picture, it does say total city tax levy of $1 million, an overall change, or $15.4 million. But at the footnote there, we have less use of reserves. So we have a general fund balance reserves, as discussed at the June 18th Committee of the Whole meeting, of $400,000. And then we have a suggested use of reserves of $276,000. And that reduction would bring a total increase of $350,000, or 2.4% overall change year over year to the tax levy. Why the use of reserves? At this point, the City Council has discussed the use of reserves in the past, and we are well within the fund balance parameters. And at this point, this is a good use of reserves and financially prudent. The working draft scenarios does show increases for fire, police, and IMRF pensions, and those are based on the actuarial reports. And we also have now the 2018 and 2019 debt service payments added to the total tax levy. Again, before the use of reserves, the tax levy would be a certain amount, but we're suggesting the use of reserves to lower it down to 2.4% year over year. When incorporating that $400,000 as mentioned, plus the $276,000, again, that lowers it down to $350,000 a year over year change, which does translate into about a typical average increase anywhere from $28 to $227 per year per home, depending on the range of your home. We range our tax bills from $2,500 a year all the way up to $20,000 a year to make sure that we're looking at the overall change. We don't just say average change. So that's the tax levy. We'll leave that there for just a moment. We did want to move over to the fund balance overall proposed budget. This summary sheet will give you a sense of all of the funds at a glance in the proposed budget. It will show you an estimated fund balance, beginning fund balance for 2020, revenues all in, expenditures all in, and then the estimated ending fund balance for the 2020 budget. You will see that there's only one fund that still shows outstanding as far as negative, and we did mention again that's the TIF number 2, expected to be positive towards the end of its term. But all of the funds were balanced in some fashion that we adhere to the fund balance policies. The general fund's progress. I think this is a really important slide to look at. When we look through the past in terms of fund balance as a ratio of expenditures to fund balance, I think it's really important to see those years that the city had some economic issues in terms of the overall picture. We've made great strides in terms of revenues and expenditures and other changes. And at this point, again, the range is 15% to 30%, and we're right there at 24.8%. This general fund summary gives you a snapshot of the 2019 estimate and the 2020 proposed budget. The estimated ending fund balance for 2019 is 25.3%, and again for 2020, 24%, again, well within the range. We're also looking at a positive net to the year, and again, just under 2% for revenue change, just under 2% for expenditure change. Moving on to utilities, we spent quite a bit of time this year working on that with our Ad Hoc Capital Improvements Committee. The City Council accepted the utility rate study as prepared by Baxter and Woodman, and we also issued that in 2019 to fund 3 large water main projects. With that being said, we were able to achieve no rate changes or increases for 2020 for any of our utilities, water, sewer, stormwater. and also refuse rate at this point is still $29.95 per month. We keep this slide up here, just a very important piece that there are no rate changes for 2020. This slide is also in the proposed budget. It just shows you at a snapshot the capital improvements picture. A majority of the capital improvements for this year would be attributed to the utilities fund due to the fact that we did issue debt for 2019 for utilities. We wanted to leave it here for City Council review and discussion and other comments. We have a couple things that we wanted to make sure as far as key takeaways to see what other changes or thoughts or considerations for the property tax levy draft proposal and any other types of incremental change that you might like to see. And in terms of the overall budget, what other items might be useful or helpful in your decision-making process? And as another footnote, at the October 15th Committee of the Whole meeting, there is another discussion on the 2020 budget. And then we also have a discussion item for an addition of the chipper service that is not proposed in the 2020 budget. So we wanted to leave it there at this time and for any discussion or comments.
Thank you, Melissa. Is there follow-up from council members? Questions related to these two? Alderman O'Brien?
Thanks, Mayor Gallo. Melissa, just a thought looking through this. For the tax levy, if we were to allocate, because right now it's $400,000 to keep it at 2.4, which I think is very fair. If we were to put another $100,000 from reserves to make it $500,000, is there best guess, would that bring it to 2.2? Like, is it every 100,000 is roughly a quarter of a percentage point?
Somewhere in that range. We've looked at that. So you could lower it. And it's going to be within a little bit lower of 24.8. So it'll be a little bit, we'll do the math, about 23.7 or something like that.
Okay. Thank you.
Alderman Zanoika?
So can we go back to the slide that has the draft tax levy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, yeah, that one. For the debt service purpose, where we see the 2018 bond that matures in the fiscal year of 2038 and the 2019 bond in fiscal year of 2028, was this accounted for in the budget before the pension increases that we see above on the first lines?
Yes.
Can you walk me through step by step how that was accounted for before that increase? Or was that increase taken into consideration with the Public Works operation line, where we have that decrease of 82.8%?
So just as a reminder, the Public Works operations line item in the 2019 budget, an additional amount of $900,000 was added for the 2019 budget to include that amount for debt service payments for the new bonds. And so that amount now is reduced back to the level of the 2017 levy that funded the 2018 budget. That's why the reduction is there. Those amounts that are listed for the debt service purpose were included in the June Committee of the Whole meeting. So to get back to your answer, if I'm understanding correctly, you're asking why the $900,000 was reduced?
I just want to make sure that those two line items at the bottom for the debt service, where we have 0 in 2017 and 0 in 2018 for those two items, and then we have this item that is just under $1 million a year, that we're accounting for that going forward in all of our budgets, and to confirm that this was also accounted for in that this is accounted for in the 2020 budget.
Yes.
Okay. And then when we had our audit back in June, where we had to then increase our contributions in order to stay on target for our police and fire and IMRF pension obligations, that was the added increase. But we had already accounted that was an added increase. I understand that. But my question is, how was that bond taken care of in the first place? Is it from that $900,000 in Public Works to pay for the two bond requirements? That's where I'm getting lost.
So when you go back to the 2019 adopted budget in the general, I don't remember what page it's in my printed budget, but when you go back to the fund balance summary page for the general fund, at the bottom, there was an amount that was accumulated for funding the debt service payment, which was $1.2 million.
Okay.
$900,000 of that was from the tax levy, and the rest of that was from reserves from the general fund. So you have to take that 1.2 in conjunction with what is funded here. So bottom line is that $1.2 million that was in the 2019 budget was accounted for to pay for the debt service payments in 2019.
Understood.
Further follow-up with that, or?
Not in that item. I wanted to also go back to the slide that talks about transfers and chargebacks.
This one or?
This one here. So we have two examples. And so the first example that we have for a transfer or interfund transfer states the general fund transfer of an annual debt service payment to the debt service fund for the 2012 general obligation bond. And then the chargeback example that we have is from various funds to pay for services of internal service funds. Can you explain the difference between these two examples?
Sure. As mentioned, the transfers or interfund transfers as per governmental accounting standard rules would be such as what's listed here. Interfund transfers from one fund to one another. Those are all balanced and articulated into the city's audit each year. They're also tied out to per the general ledger line item. These are set up based on the funding priorities of the budget and also what are the requirements. So the debt service fund in particular, per the bond ordinance that was approved with the 2012 bond, has an amount that needs to be paid from the general fund of $751,713 per the bond ordinance that was set up for the 2012 bond from the general fund to the debt service. So that's just an example of a transfer. A chargeback is different. So a chargeback is accumulating funds based on a cost allocation method and an approved accounting principle in terms of internal service. So it's collecting, think of like your health insurance fund.
Okay.
You're collecting those transfers or cost allocations from your departments. And the reason you have an internal service fund is you can clearly, at a glance, see the effectiveness of those types of funds. The health insurance fund, the liability insurance fund, building and land fund, vehicle and equipment, and vehicle and equipment, and garage fund, sorry. So those are the reasons why you want an internal service fund, because that way you can see the effectiveness of those services that you are providing internally to your internal customers.
Okay.
Well, are you okay with that? Further comments or questions for discussion on this item?
Mine got answered.
Okay. Then I believe we can move on from this topic. Thank you. And then we'll just continue to address these one-on-one as council members go through it with Manager Crumstock and Ms. Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
And please let us know if you have any questions in the meantime.
Of course.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Well, moving on to item number 2, we have the G1 ordinance amendment. Here we are revisiting this topic a little over a year ago. The G1 was adopted by the council. Applications have been filed by new and current businesses. Licenses have been distributed. Now the language of the ordinance is back before the council to determine if any of these changes in language are necessary or if the program overall is warranted. City Council and staff have had the ability now to survey the topology of this overall program, and we've had some time to analyze and see how the licenses have impacted each segment of our community. How has the G1 license affected or impacted the business community? City Council was originally told by the business community they were losing patrons to other establishments in the area, meaning our neighbors, Arlington Heights, Palatine, etc., to those who were also implementing video gaming in their establishments. What benefits or problems or considerations have arisen as a result of this now being in existence? How has this G1 license impacted the residential community, our residents at large? What benefits have any of them noticed? Have we received any feedback since this has been going on to date? We did hear that this was, again, a concept to provide more social, leisure, and dining opportunities to our residents within the community. So how this program has affected the city as a whole, that's a question I think we should examine when we're looking at this G1 ordinance, and how the program has been of financial value. I think at this point now we should be able to have some information on what these licenses have brought in, what sort of financial gains we've made from the state, from the taxation. We should look into recognizing whether or not there were any upticks in crime or complaints or any undesirable components that weren't considered in the beginning but thought maybe it was going to come to fruition. What type of new businesses have we seen come forth as a direct result of now allowing video gaming in our community? All of this should be discussed tonight when taking the consideration of the language into account and determining what we need to do going forward in order to either modify or amend the ordinance as it stands today in order to circumvent some of the issues we've had as of recent when we denied providing an entity with the G1 as it stood, the ordinance as it stood to date. You'll see if you scroll to the next page, page numbers here, page 9 on the PDF. In red, line item A, after going beyond the current ordinance as it's written, there's suggested updates for consideration. The first one says, for a new restaurant coming into the city, not much has been added to there other than in the second to last sentence where it says at least one gas grill and hood, rather than in the original where it says at least one gas grill, gas or electric was an option, right? And I believe that some of our previous institutions had followed recommendations and mistook them for requirements, and so that posed some areas of gray when we were moving forward. I think the main point for a new establishment coming in, I think based on the recommendation of putting a gas grill with a hood over it, was because it came with a significant or nominal investment, and I think the point was to make sure that the entity coming in, the enterprise coming in, had skin in the game, so to speak, wanting to stay in town longer than a year should their establishment not vote as well as they forecasted. Then Part B, which is for a restaurant or establishment that has been operating in the city for a minimum of 2 years before the Ordinance 18-24 was approved on June of 2018 and is currently in good standing with the city since 2017. The additions fall down to the following. Review the sale and transfer of a business and that G1 license. There's opportunity here, which I would defer to Alderman Budmetz at a point in time to discuss. He had mentioned it at the last conversation, Committee of the Whole, where transferring at least one of the corporate officers in the case of a corporation or one member in the case of an LLC or one partner in the case of a sole proprietorship must remain in or attached to the business in order to keep that current G1 license established. We should see if the sale and transfer occurs, whether or not the menu should be warranted to be expanded upon, or if City Council can mandate that some minimum requirement of cuisine is offered. Right? Again, these are all suggestions that have come up in the previous council meetings based on comments and feedback provided during the time of the last G1 ordinance for the last entity that had come up requesting it. Moving on to item C, maintaining a G1 as originally intended to help the City of Rolling Meadows dining establishments remain competitive with the state's approval in passing of video game gambling. In order to ensure that businesses operating in the City of Rolling Meadows that hold a G1 license are genuinely a restaurant, they must demonstrate by providing proof that a majority of their revenue is derived from a combination of sale of both food and beverage, and that the revenue generated from the gaming machines does not make up their majority. We had discussed early on, back in the early days of this, April of 2018 and May of 2018, at the Economic Development Committee meetings about video gaming cafes coming into our community once this ordinance were to pass. And now it's important that we look at this and see what type of trends we have allowed to exist or coexist alongside our current restaurants. Line item D focuses on compliance with the following restrictions for businesses operating within a G1 license. Again, these are all suggestions in order to modify the language, and your feedback, council feedback, will be important. But similar to the current outlined compliance criteria for dispensing or the cultivation of medical cannabis, the council should explore whether or not businesses operating with a G1 cannot exist within, for example, a single-use property. Restaurants operating with a G1 shall not be established in a multi-use or multi-tenant properties that are not also retail business in nature, meaning if they're a co-located establishment that exists inside a corporate building, if there's a restaurant inside a large multi-story corporate building that has an A1 and A2, should they be allowed to qualify for video gaming, or is that a place for workers to go on their lunch break and throw some money in some video games? Another potential compliance issue would be minimum distance from incompatible uses. No restaurants with the G1 shall be located, established, maintained, or operated by any lot that has a property line within at least 100 feet of, for example, line item A gas station or charging stations. I know conversation at Economic Development Committee focused on not making our community an avenue where any entity that could have a video gaming system should have a video gaming system. And so when we look toward the future, would that be a gas station? Would that be a liquor store? Would it be in a proximity with a pre-existing daycare center? Again, some of these came straight from the cultivation of cannabis, so I don't know that it makes sense. But these are areas that we should consider. So when going through this G1 ordinance as it stands to date, it's important that I hear back from the council as to what the objections are for how it reads to date and what needs to be modified in order for this to pass more fluidly for our existing businesses and also welcome new businesses. So with that, I want to open the floor up for conversation and discussion. And so if nobody's going to have anything to say about this, should we just leave it for the attorney to draft language?
Let me just make one quick comment, and I know that we've talked about this. Approximately $100,000, that was one of your questions financially to the city. And just for folks at home, the business pays $120 annually. That could be prorated depending on when they actually open up. The actual gaming institution, so Illinois Gaming, Lucky Lincoln, Awesome Hands, they pay $1,000 annually to the city of Rolling Meadows. And then it's $1,000 for each of the machines. So when this was passed originally by state statute, you were only allowed 5 machines. With the July state new ordinance or state statute that they actually created for gaming overall, they allowed a 6th machine. So at this point in time, the 5 machines are in. They are eligible per our code if they want to bring in the 6th machine. And we are on a January 1st renewal process for the 6 establishments that are currently running. So just answering that one question about financially, I can tell you police-wise, we've had no issues. And the 6 establishments, I can tell you many of them, I'm not using their names, are part of community events, so that other part giving back to the community. But again, those are just my answers.
And I appreciate the financial metrics returned. The purpose of this conversation is to modify the language of the ordinance as it stands because there seemed to be some issue with it. And I think it's appropriate that we go through and make those modifications so we don't find ourselves in an unsavory position with a potential new business or with an existing business. And so with that, I open the floor for suggestions or discussion. Alderman Budmats?
Hi, thank you, Alderman Mayor Gallo. In preparation for tonight's meeting, I took the opportunity to look at what other villages have done or municipalities have done. The city of Aurora, interestingly enough, changed their law in March of 2018. I recall, I think it was Tim from Daisy's saying that he was concerned that the market would get watered down and that there was only so much pie to go around, and that he thought that the market might get diluted if there were too many licenses. And so I think Aurora tried to answer that, and they made made a change to their law that it said effective March of 2018, no new video gaming terminal license location may be issued to any establishment that is less than 2,640 feet from another licensed establishment measured from the property line and where there is an existing licensed video gaming terminal licensed in the same single shopping center, plaza, or strip mall without the applicant obtaining a special use permit allowing the issuance of said license. Current establishments located within 2,640 feet within the same single shopping center, plaza, or strip mall with a gaming license in effect at the time of the adoption of this section shall be renewed yearly so long as the license is issued to the current owners. They also address that any sale, transfer, or assignment of more than 50% of the ownership of a business or partnership shall terminate the license. In the event that such license is held in the name of a corporation, the sale, transfer, or assignment of 50% of the stock or more shall terminate the license. So those are two items that we had kind of discussed, or one of them at least, but it does help to reduce the proliferation of and at least spread the gaming opportunities out across the city rather than concentrate them all in one area and then dilute our ability to service all of the restaurants who are trying to do this, who are longtime Rolling Meadows businesses. So I'd be happy to provide this as well for further discussion. But I came across that. That's what Aurora is doing. Similarly, South Elgin has also placed a limit on the transfer of the license when it's part of a limited license corporation. But basically the same concept, that we don't let the business the gaming license transfer with the sale of the business. That the individuals who are responsible for applying for license basically are the people who hang on to that license, and when they're gone, so is the license, and it's up to the new entity to reapply, and the city can make a determination if they want the new people to be part of that or not.
Mm-hmm. And you raise a good point about density and geography, and when looking at the current establishments that have come in, Daisy's, for example, or Isabella's, and then a couple others that have requested entry into our community, I noticed that they all tend to go up. Now, I don't know if it's coincidental because I haven't done the analysis quite thoroughly, but just on first-hand review, they tend to be erected across the street from multifamily dwelling and multifamily housing. And I don't know if there's a correlation there, but I think it's something we should consider to make sure that residents in our community are not being targeted in any specific way, should that be the case. And Alderman O'Brien, you did have your hand up, Alderman Budmetz, so if you're...
No, that was a similar one to that, but I think my question more along the lines of, I think, too, maybe we want to discuss overall limit, putting a cap on it, because I know there was initial discussion a while ago, 10 or something. I know we were going to talk about that. But my concern more of having two of them currently in the ward that I represent is the crux is the hood. I think from just talking to the people, Daisy's, reps, things like that, is now granted what the intent was, I can't speak for the previous council, the previous mayor. It seems like the intent was a hood, but it's not in the ordinance. So that's what I'm in agreement with Alderman Budmetz on. Maybe we do put some stipulations in. I know we can't do that 2,600 feet because I think it's about a half a mile, and there's already some that are established that are already within a half a mile of each other. But I'm game to discuss that. My concern more along the lines of is the hood requirement, because it seems like the current business owners that went in, that was the intent. That's what they were forced to do based on obviously prior things, and that's the more things I've got concern about is the hood versus no hood. But these are good discussion points as well.
Alderman Veneziano, we'll go around the circle.
Thank you. So a couple points. One, I would definitely, from residents' feedback, to keep in and emphasize on the advertisement of the slots. I've this week reported to staff on the complaints on so much signage, not just in the window, but in the fairway and right-of-way. Fairway? See how?
That's golf.
Golf. And then in the parking lot area. So I would definitely want to keep that in. I would say no signage other than the window. from the resident feedback that I've gotten. The other feedback I've gotten is that residents go to restaurants and not go to a restaurant to go gambling. And this ordinance was in place before I came on to the council, and I would tend to agree. I take my kids to a restaurant to go eat. An example, Reps, we walk in, to the left is the bar and the slots. My kids don't know that exists. Go to the right, we go as a family. If we want to go as adults, we go to the left. I would never take my kids to a place like Daisy's. It's just not an establishment. So to say a restaurant versus a not restaurant is how this G1 is going to distinguish, I don't think is the right route. I do like the wording, although I would like a number in there, that the combination of the sale and food beverage revenue generate more than the slot revenue is appropriate. I would like a number in there, though, because, generated more could be $1 more, and that's not what we're looking to do either. What was the other one? I apologize. And then the sale and transfer of the G1 license, I would like that on both new and existing licenses, not just for new businesses applying. Because we can't say that an existing business isn't going to sell. And so then to address the hood situation, in all due respect to the current businesses that have the G1 license, that was the ordinance at that time, and they had to follow the ordinance. We're redoing the ordinance because it was in an early stage, and I don't think that the ordinance should stipulate because those businesses had to follow the rules at that time. If we're moving forward and the council feels that it's not necessary to have the hood in there, which I don't feel it is, because some establishments may not need a hood in order to be considered under this with beverage and food access, the hood isn't necessary. Just my take on that.
Alderman Diaz, I see you in your hand.
Yeah, I have a question. When there's a sale of the business, does the liquor license stick with the company, or does it have to be transferred?
So typically, if sale of business comes with the same name, so if they buy out the entire company, so ABC is running restaurant A, B, and C, but it's ABC Corporation that they bought out, no, it would not change. However, if ABC is now not the owner of that property, they do have to come back for a new liquor license, which generates exactly what Alderman Budmetz has stated, where we would be notified at that point. But again, it goes back into how much of the LLC you actually have.
Okay. So I did some due diligence on this, and I sent out yesterday to everyone on council. Illinois Department of Public Health says in Illinois, all food that will be offered for sale or given away to the public must be prepared in a licensed food service kitchen. And I sent this to everybody. So it's already established. It says, it gives a list of what is required. And throughout our conversation of the G1, it's always been talked about that it's a restaurant. And even in the write-up, it says for a new restaurant or for a restaurant established, or dining establishment. So I think it would be very easy for the council to just take these items that are already required by the state of Illinois Department of Public Health, and just add this to the G1, and it lays everything out. We don't have to define what a restaurant is. The whole idea of this was to create more restaurants in the city, and it has done that. I have gone to several of these places just to eat, and while I was in a couple, not all, I saw families come in just to eat, not to play games. So I think it has accomplished what we wanted to. We just didn't define it well the first time. So I've given a copy of this to everyone. I've emailed it except to you. So now you have a copy. And I would say, utilizing what the Illinois Department of Public Health says, and that anywhere you serve food, whether it's for purchase or to give away, it has to be in a licensed food service kitchen. We adopt this into the G1, and it pretty much, it's turnkey.
I'm not following what that means. We have a health inspector come to our kitchens to validate whether or not they meet certain standards or cleanliness guidelines. What is it going to solve by adopting
The Illinois Department of Public Health says that all food that will be offered for sale or given away must be prepared in a licensed service kitchen.
Okay.
And it says you've got to have a sink for hand washing, a 3-compartment sink, a mop sink, a grease trap. It talks about public sewer, public water, handicap accessibility, floors made of smooth, non-absorbent, blah, blah, walls made of smooth, non-absorbent, easily cleanable materials, ceilings, light fixtures. It identifies everything.
Okay.
So that if there is a business in town that is serving food, they have to abide by this.
In doing your due diligence with that, do you know whether or not the current holders of our G1?
Every single one of them, including the 2 that are applying, meet these requirements.
Wonderful. Then there shouldn't be an issue with integrating that for standards. Sure. That's something the council can explore, and I would call on our attorney to look into that as well and see if there's any impact, positive or negative. But it's never bad to have additional standards. Alderman Sonoyka.
To speak to Alderman Diastis's document, for those watching at home, there is, perhaps we can have this submitted for the record in an updated agenda packet. So there's an item on here, number 14, that says fryers, stoves, grills, and any other equipment that will produce grease or steam must be placed under a ventilation hood, which is to state if you have a grill that is producing grease or steam, that you should have a ventilation hood. This does not necessarily mandate a grill, and it does not necessarily mandate a hood unless you meet these conditions. So, Alderman, this is a question then for Alderman Diastis on what he would propose regarding guidance for this number 14 item.
The ordinance,
Item 14.
I understand, but I'm looking in the current G1 to see, and the current G1 says you must have a grill, and all I'm saying is add this to the current ordinance so that if you have any type of grill and all grills produce steam or grease, you have to have a ventilation hood. I'm saying you adopt all the points that are on here, since this is really the law in Illinois, and any establishment that sells food or gives food away should be abiding by this now.
I would make a point of clarification if that's a law or guidance to adhere to. Whether do you know if this is a...
Well, it appears that this...
Melissa.
Go on.
Oh, I'm sorry. It appears that these are guidelines in order for these establishments to have licensure as a food service industry. But what it doesn't clarify is whether the city's requirement for the establishment will require a grill with a hood. It just says that if there is a grill that produces grease or steam, you must have a hood. It's not clarifying the main issue that we were previously discussing. But what this does is establish the guidelines for licensure that if these establishments do have fryers, stove, grill, or other equipment that produce steam or grease, they have to have a hood.
Right.
But it doesn't require that they have those pieces of equipment.
The current ordinance already says you must have a grill.
Right, but it doesn't establish that it's a grill that produces grease or steam that requires a hood.
Okay.
It just
all,
says a grill.
Okay.
Right.
All grills produce steam and grease. There is not one that does not produce grease or steam.
Okay.
And you can check that, and with any vendor will tell you yes. Any
As well as the electric?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
If you put hamburger in an electric grill, it's going to create grease.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're not in food science right now, so I don't know if we can go down that road. What I would urge us to do is pause and see how this may affect any dining establishments or food establishments in the community before hastily throwing this into G1, or see if this is something much broader that we have to look into. Alderman Sonoyka, you had your hand up, so I'll let you speak.
I just wanted to support then that clarification, because that's what I wanted to determine if Alderman Diastis was stating that he wanted to then include the guidance that is provided by the by the document that
I'm just helping you out.
the document that was provided earlier and that is now submitted to the record. So thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. Alderman Bessetti.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, I want to thank Alderman Diastis for his work here, and I think this is a excellent thing for us to add, and I think we should proceed with adding this to the ordinance.
Thank you.
I think there's a little bit of due diligence that needs to still happen, as you mentioned, regarding unintended consequences. But I think it's a way of very concisely putting this elusive definition of a restaurant on our into the ordinance, because we've been wrestling with that whole definition a little bit.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Veneziano.
Thank you. So I guess my rebuttal to both aldermen would be that one of our establishments in town that I went to, that I was quite shocked because it was the first one that I went to, they have the hood, they have the grill, they meet all of the requirements that we've asked. And to me, it appears as it's a gaming cafe. So they have their requirements. So if they are established with this hood and the grill because we put it in as a restaurant, we have still not accomplished what we're trying to accomplish by keeping gaming cafes out of Rolling Meadows. So I think that by adding the word or verbiage of having a hood with grills with a restaurant is not necessarily the answer to the question and problem that we're having with this G1 license, because establishments have worked their way around this already.
Alderman Bessetti.
Okay. I would agree with what she said. However, this would just be, I would think, would be a portion. I also think there's a place for the language in here where we have whatever the percentage is of revenue being for food and beverage. That's something else that I would think would also be in there and may address Alderman Veneziano's concerns.
Okay. Alderman O'Brien, you had something?
Thank you, Mayor Gallo. Just a couple things on there. I think, and I know Attorney Wolf was going to take a look at this guideline requirement. I don't know either way it comes out to be that why would we want to contradict the health department? I mean, if it is a guideline, why we would want to contradict it? And here's just another thought, too, depending how this goes forward, if it would come down to hood versus no hood, if it's determined that no hood is required based on how it checks out, would we ever want to put a limitation on that and say that those types of establishments would be allowed to have gaming terminals, but at half of the state requirement or state allowance? That it's allowed. The state allows 6 now, but maybe since they're not really truly conforming to what the intent of the of what the ordinance was, they're allowed, but maybe at half of what the state allows, that we put a restriction that they can only, in this instance, they'd only have 3. But I don't want to put a number on it in case we've already seen the state increase the terminals by 1, is that maybe a compromise is, ideally, we'd like them to have the hood. That's just my gut feeling on the conversations. But if it does go forward, that we restrict them to have a lower amount of gaming terminals.
So, what you're saying is the type of equipment in their kitchen would dictate the amount or type of cuisine prepared, and as a direct correlation, they can only have lesser proportion of gaming systems? Is that what
that's my gut. If they don't want to come into what potentially it seems like the intent of the ordinance was, to have a hood, because we had establishments that made that financial investment, and as Alderman Budmat said, I think at the June committee, the whole meeting, we would have a tough leg to stand on. This is where I would defer to council. Why were the other ones required to put hood in? It's not in the ordinance.
They weren't required to.
And I'm not going to talk about water under the bridge, but I mean, it's kind of applicable now. I don't know what conversations were had or not, but the ones I talked to felt it was a requirement to get the license here in the city. And I know Alderman Broadmat's brought that up as a valid point beforehand as well, is are we prepared for if these other establishments come back to us and say, you made me make the $25,000 investment, now what?
Alderman Sinlaika.
So I would like council to take a look at item C in their packet, which is talking about the intent of the ordinance, saying that we want to help Rolling Meadows dining establishments remain competitive with the state's approval and passing of video game gambling. So whether or not there is a hood or a grill in an establishment, if it's a restaurant that's serving food and beverages and it meets this requirement, would we be able to then state this seems to fit the spirit of the ordinance? Because it sounds like earlier we were saying the reason to have a hood wasn't because of a health concern. It was because the city wanted to make sure that there was buy-in from a new business coming in. So if we're looking for buy-in, this is item C is demonstrating that we want a proportion of revenues coming from the actual restaurant versus the gambling component of that business. Open to thoughts from council on this.
Alderman Bessetti.
Yeah, as I said, I would be in favor of both being in there. I mean, I think item C clearly states, and it goes along with kind of I think what Alderman Budmatz was talking about with the percentage of the revenue needing to come from food or beverage. That, to me, is probably a given. The proposal by Alderman Diastis, though, I think the reason I would support that is that it clearly states what a licensed food service kitchen is, and in order to be a restaurant, I would think they have to have a licensed food service kitchen. That would be the question to ask, whether it be our health people or council or whatever. If to have a restaurant, you have to have a licensed food service kitchen. I think the answer is yes, but I'm not a lawyer. So
I imagine we have a license for food service and distribution.
Yes, and restaurants, obviously I haven't read it, but there's all different kinds of levels, high, low, medium, depending on what they actually produce. So the answer is yes.
So if there's levels to the definition of what a restaurant is and their food production, then we should make sure that these are congruent with whatever level of food production that's
and that also goes back when the health inspector out what are low risk, what are high risk, but there are levels for each of those items.
Alderman Diastis.
So I want to get a little bit of clarification. Are we saying in order to get a G1, you have to be a restaurant? Because if we're not saying that, then we open ourselves up to gaming cafes. So, and that was the whole intention of this from the very get-go, was not to have gaming cafes in the city. So if they're a restaurant, then they won't be a gaming cafe because they have to serve food. So I'm just trying to get some clarification. Does the council want to take a different approach to this now and say we will allow gaming cafes, or are we going to say these have to be restaurants?
Well, With all due respect, Isabella's and Daisy's are gaming cafes. The city of Rolling Meadows has already allowed gaming cafes into the community.
If I may object to you, they are full-service restaurants. They meet the criteria of a licensed food service kitchen, and they serve food.
Yes, but it's a gaming cafe where my child cannot go into Daisy's. I cannot bring my child into Daisy's. That's a gaming cafe. I can't bring my 5-year-old boy into Daisy's to get a burger. That's a gaming cafe. My 5-year-old boy had to stand outside while my dad got a burger from Daisy's gaming cafe. So we've already allowed gaming cafes into the community. The intent and spirit, if you were to review the minutes from April 24th and May 8th's meetings discussing this very ordinance, it was to help incentivize our restaurants or give them an incentive by passing this through, because we even had the stadium owner, Vince Buffolino, up here telling us he's losing patrons to other communities because they go where there's video games available. And the Chamber of Commerce came in and supported that same notion that if the City Council does not open up our community to allow our current restaurants to have video games in their facilities, that they will lose majority or a significant portion of their customer base to this. And so the spirit was to allow our current restaurants, which are all restaurants, some bars, some sports bars, but nonetheless a restaurant, to incorporate gaming machines. And since this time, we have actually provided 3 of our restaurants and then brought in 2 gaming cafes, with other gaming cafes knocking at our door, and we've denied an existing bar that serves food as part of its restaurant guidelines to date. Alderman Bessetti.
Thank you. When I say I'm in support of adding these things, I'm looking at item A for any new restaurant coming into the city. I understand there is a difference between what we have on there on item A and what we have there on item B. As far as businesses that meet the standards of item B, that ship has sailed, as far as I'm concerned. If we have a petitioner that's looking for that falls into that item B, it's my opinion that I don't think we really have a leg to stand on as long as they meet the current ordinance that we have today.
Can you elaborate a little bit for me?
We can't force them to have a hood.
Okay.
To say it bluntly.
Alderman Budmeister.
The way I see it, item C would be on all businesses, whether they're new, existing, whatever. And the fact is that each of the establishments stated that they were a restaurant when they came in and applied, that they were going to have a restaurant that was going to offer video gaming. None of them came to us and said, we're going to be a video gaming cafe that serves food. And so, as such, we took them at their word that they were going to be a restaurant first and foremost. So I have no problem with passing C, which says that maintaining a G1 license, and that means every year when it comes up, that if you're selling the majority of your sales and your revenues are video gaming, thank you very much, but you need to turn the machine off until the majority of your sales are food and beverage, because that's what we're trying to do, is encourage that sale, not the sale of video gaming. So that needs to apply to all, and I don't have a problem with applying that to the business that you've said crossed the line possibly into the video gaming cafe, because quite honestly, they came to us saying, we're going to be a restaurant. And if you come to us saying, I'm going to be a restaurant, then we're going to call you a restaurant and expect you to look and act like a restaurant.
From the standpoint of item C, I would agree.
Okay. one other thing, if I can take a second bite at the apple, because I missed this before, the advertising, as Alderman Veneziano said, is a little. I find the language of the existing ordinance to be confusing. I don't know, 10% of whatever existing signage, I don't exactly understand what that means. I do know that I personally do not want to see signs outside of the place of business in the parkway. I've actually seen billboards and flyers out in front, slots and et cetera. So if whatever we could do to keep the signage inside within the parameters of the establishment and not in their parking lot, and then inside their building, and then X number of square feet. I don't care what it is, 10 square feet, whatever the appropriate amount is, but some amount of square feet that's not exceeded. I don't care if their window's 2,000 square feet. Their sign has to be whatever we determine it's going to be in terms of square feet, and that's it. And if it's bigger than that, thank you very much. Your license is expired. Is on hold until you can reduce your signage to what we requested you to do.
Alderman Veneziano.
I have a question for staff. So, how often would we know what the sale of food and beverage a business would have? I know they file the taxes monthly.
They're supposed to.
Or supposed to. How would we know their combination of sale and food beverage revenue? Like, how would they be able to give that to the city? Like, how often?
So, per state statute, and they have to file with the state, and they have to file with the city. Sometimes we're chasing after them to do the filing, but they do have their gross sales. So they do put in food and beverage into the gross sales. So when they do file it, that's why we put it in the good standing, because there are businesses that we are their post office, and we're chasing after them, and we are getting notices and other pieces. So they do file when we finally do get to that point.
And how often is that?
Once a month. They're supposed to be filing once a month. And again, some of them use us as their post office, and they want the notice and the penalties. And there's some that once they got a new owner, we don't have the same issues. But there's some that are regular. Hey, they're great. But by state statute, they're supposed to be filing to the state, and they're supposed to be filing to the municipality if you have a food and beverage monthly. And our code is by, if I remember correctly, the 15th of the month or the 10th, or can't remember exactly.
Can I follow up?
Yes, go ahead.
So I guess my follow-up to that would be that I would suggest that in this wording, besides adding a number to the combination generated be greater than, I would like a number that if a business, once they file, that if that generated business is not greater than for, say, 3 months or 6 months, that they are given a notice that they could potentially lose their G1. I don't want to wait a full year to find out that their business is a gaming cafe.
I don't want to wait more than a month.
I was being nice in 3 months.
For trending.
It's noted. I think that's been noted. So. Alderman Diaz.
Thank you. I have to tell you, I have a problem with this item B, because it says for a restaurant or establishment, but nowhere in here does it say anything about a grill or a hood or any type of cooking kitchen equipment. So that means any business that, well, there's only one business in town that's not a restaurant that has an A3. So it sounds like it's like we're writing this specifically for one business. There's only one business that has an A3.
Now is your opportunity to write it. This isn't written in stone. So how would you like to amend it or update it? That's what tonight's about.
I would put, they have to have at least, just like A, they have to have a gas grill and hood.
And again, you're asking a pre-existing infrastructure to go ahead and potentially make modifications to
right, they're making an investment in their business so that they can create future wealth for themselves. Anybody who makes an investment obviously wants a return on their investment. I don't see why we're creating legislation for one business. That, to me, is not correct.
Alderman Sunoika.
To respond to Alderman Veneziano's comment about other establishments that have a G1 license currently and follow all of the requirements, including the recommendations of having both a hood and a grill, we are still identifying issues with the spirit of the ordinance, and that's why we're looking beyond just a hood and a grill. And that ultimately a hood and a grill aren't determining what is a gaming cafe versus a restaurant, since we have examples where that's just not the case.
Alderman Diastis.
So, B says you don't have to have a kitchen, you don't even have to be a restaurant to have gaming. To me, that's an ideal gaming cafe. You don't have to be a restaurant. You don't have to serve food, and you can have games.
In the spirit of B, it also says that you've been here before June 12th of 2018, and that you've been in good standing since 2017, and we haven't had any video gaming cafes in this community since then, so a new one wouldn't just pop up because it's not here.
Well, like I said, Joe, we're writing this law.
Excuse me, Mr.
Like
Mayor.
I said, Mr. Mayor, we're writing this for one business. I don't think that's correct.
I don't believe we're writing it for one business. I do believe there could be infrastructure components added. But again,
like what?
we're not paving the way here for any new business, because point B is only for existing establishments. Okay, existing establishments. So a gaming cafe, since we didn't allow them before 2017, they won't be here today because they weren't here in 2017. So we're not letting a video gaming cafe come in.
There's only one business that has an A3 that this applies to.
There's a bar.
There's one.
Okay, there's a bar.
There's one.
Okay.
And they're asking for games, and now they'll become a bar with games. And I thought that was never in the intention of the city council to have a bar with video games.
Then why did we pass two, or at least one right here down the street, that's a bar with games? Why did the council pass that? Why did the council pass that?
I don't know which one you're
passed
talking
it.
about.
Daisy's is a bar.
They
with
have
games.
a restaurant. They serve food. They have a full-service kitchen.
If it's a restaurant, you could bring your kids there.
Yes.
They have a full-service kitchen. Are they not
If it's a
defined as a
restaurant, you could
restaurant?
bring your kids there, right?
Why not?
You can't bring your kids into
Children
Daisy's.
said.
You are not allowed to bring children into Daisy's. Not allowed.
It's 21 and over.
Okay.
It's not a restaurant. Restaurants allow children.
Does a bar allow children?
No, because you're talking about a bar with games. And
Well,
that's what Daisy's.
that's what B will be.
So with the other ones, that's what we have already. It's kind of contradictory. Anyway, further comments or questions? Alderman Sunoika?
I would just like to request a straw vote regarding some of these items, so that way staff has more direction after these conversations, since we've had quite a number of discussions on each one of these.
So you're looking for council to go ahead and vote on each one of these line items, one at a time, for further direction for staff?
I don't want to keep us here all night. I would like to provide guidance with item C specifically, with the recommendation from Alderman Veneziano that in addition to demonstrating that the majority of revenue is derived from the sale of food and beverage, to be monitored by either by month or by 3 months. So we can maybe start with saying if we want it to be 3 months or 1 month.
So I would say anything is open here for additions or edits in this case. This isn't my ordinance. I didn't draft this, so you can add whatever we feel comfortable. If Alderman Veneziano wanted to add it, council added that here, and we will incorporate that. And then at the time of the reading of the ordinance, If you appreciate or agree with it during first reading, you vote on it and pass it. If not, you make the amendments like we do in council meetings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to just make it easier for staff to show where the direction of the council is at this point, because it sounds like, from hearing from Alderman Veneziano, Alderman Budmetz, and Alderman Bessetti, that, and myself, we are in favor of including item C and including and potentially including a month requirement, which is not currently here. And I'm getting a nod also from Alderman O'Brien as well. So that is the purpose of the straw vote for that particular item.
Okay, wonderful. Then what we will do is go ahead and commence in a series of straw votes, beginning with item C. And I would like to see those who are in favor of incorporating a time frame for receiving reports
And percentage.
and then a percentage based on revenue for staff to pursue, and maybe you could do some research with the
we'll
Chamber
come
of
back.
Commerce.
Yeah, we'll come back because we're also going to have to get their contracts with their gaming, and because again, how much goes to the gaming and how much is coming back to them, it all depends.
And
But
I believe it'll be easier with our older establishments who have historic record here that you can extrapolate some trends. So all those in favor, please raise your hands. Aye.
Aye.
Those in favor?
Yeah.
Those
I'm
opposed?
sorry, can we clarify in favor of?
C.
So I was just talking about C, including timeframes for delivery.
So staff would put the timeframes out to us?
In a draft ordinance, yes.
All right.
Okay.
Question or point of clarification. I'm assuming that none of the establishments that you were discussing that who have a hard time bringing in their food and beverage receipts in or their paperwork in on a monthly basis currently have video gaming licenses.
The current 6 operating ones, we have not had any issues with. And I will leave the conversation at that.
So I guess what I'm saying is I think there should be a stricter
Policy?
a policy, especially for those businesses, if they're late in providing that information, that would be a serious infraction because of the benefit that they are receiving in having a G1 license. And so I would hope that would never be an issue for anybody who has a G1 license if they're getting the added benefit of the additional income from gaming, that they would be able to hire an accountant to make sure that happens in a timely fashion.
Yeah, we'll reword C for that, for the renewals.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Does council have any recommendations on what that time frame is, or what that policy, how strict that policy is?
I would leave that up to staff to figure out based on what length we're going to give them, 3 months, and then based on what a time frame for them to follow up to be, because that's more work for them to follow up. I would leave that to them to give us a recommendation and go from there.
Okay. So then moving on to Alderman Sonoyka, you have your hand up.
Not regarding this item, it would be with a second item. Then for clarification, it sounds like there appears to be some contention with item B as it stands. And so I would like to request a straw vote for including an item B, which it continues the spirit of the original ordinance to say we're trying to help establishments that already existed. And if we want to include the ability to specify for establishments that were already in the city before the G1 license, or if we wanted to strike that completely.
So you want to take the poll about the first sentence?
Yes. So for B, talking about the difference. So this is establishing that we're talking about any establishments before June 12, 2018, correct?
Correct. So you want to take a poll to see whether or not this should remain included in the verbiage?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to request that council show a series of hands for those in favor of keeping the verbiage which is in red for a restaurant or establishment that has been operating in the city for a minimum of 2 years before Ordinance 18-24 as approved on June 12, 2018 and is in good standing with the city since 2017. All those in favor of keeping that line item, show your hands. 3,
With
4.
revision.
That's 4.
That wasn't the question.
Yeah.
As is, no.
request for clarification from Alderman Bessetti for the revision.
So, where is it here? So I think we still had a question on B, the whole issue of the hood, no hood. Would it fall into...
Sir, this is for existing establishments as they exist. Existing establishments as they exist. Kitchen infrastructure right as they exist. So whether they have a hood, great. If they don't have a hood, they don't operate with a hood as it stands. This is about pre-existing, currently existing establishments.
I would say unless...
You can either say yes or no. That's what
it's as written, right, Mayor Gallo?
Correct.
Mayor.
Okay, then no.
Okay, so I'm going to just, without rereading the question, a quick show of hands, those in favor of the red line verbiage in B. All those in favor? That's 3. Those opposed? 4. So you want to remove that verbiage. You want to remove that verbiage. Now, in this point, we no longer have anything that discusses any existing banquet halls, any existing facilities that serve food. We have nothing now. Is that the way we want to
Well, I was going to say,
operate?
do we open it up to, as Alderman Bessetti said, modifications to it?
What you're opening it up to now is that we have nothing that discusses any pre-existing establishments coming in and requesting a G1. So if we have a hotel that's
So we
coming in...
can't modify it? Because that's why I clarified with you before we were confirmed with Alderman Bessetti. It's as written, because before when Alderman Bessetti was talking, we were saying it's as written. I thought it was a chance to do modifications.
As just the part in red as written.
Right.
Just the part in red as written. To establish what type of businesses have been here when this ordinance was originally adopted on June 12th, 2018, and for any business that was in play at that time, but also in good standing as of 2017. That's.
So was the follow-up question going to be, and maybe it's my misunderstanding for the procedure, is if we approved that, then there was going to be an open discussion for modifications to how it's currently written?
Alderman Sunoika.
We can talk about any of this at this point. I just want to make sure that when we get this ordinance in front of us, I don't want to spend an hour and a half on the diocese during a city council meeting going line by line, because it sounds like some aldermen don't want any type of concession for businesses that are already established here that would like to apply for a G1 license. And so I wanted to see if we should even be discussing that, since there are some aldermen who don't think that there should be any different type of judgment on a G1 for an established restaurant or business or entity or whatever you want to describe. And so that's why that red line in B is all that we were looking at, to see, do we even want to distinguish between businesses that might need help that are already here or not?
Okay.
Okay.
So any hotels that are here, too bad. It's like it's your first day in town. We don't care.
Banquet halls.
That's what we were clarifying. So if would you like I don't know if Mr. Mayor would like to provide that again now that we have clarification for that item, to decide if we want to have that distinguished.
I appreciate it, because that was the question I had, is I certainly want to have some consideration there. I thought it was just strictly as it was written throughout all of B with sub-bullets A and B as well, because that's part of B.
Oh, I'm glad you now get it. So, to retake the vote, those in favor of continuing with the red line items.
To have discussion.
Aye.
Yeah. To have discussion.
Yeah.
To have discussion on item B.
For the third time to have discussion. Yes. Those in favor, please raise your hands.
To have discussion.
Yeah, to have discussion, sure.
Wonderful. Thank you. Wow. Is there any more you'd like clarity on to provide staff with direction? Any line items? Happy to do it.
Yes. So, Mr. Mayor, I wanted to just also talk about item B for this. So there's two Bs. The one that we were just discussing, and then when we look at the subset B, talking about the menu expansion or minimum requirement. I do not feel that the council should judge whether or not a menu is qualified as a restaurant or not. But I know this has come up before, so I'm open to hear what council has to say about that subset.
I would also agree with that, Alderman Sonoyka. Or if it is, we've got to put some more concrete examples in there for clarification, but I'm comfortable with it. We shouldn't dictate what's on a restaurant's menu.
Agreed.
I would concur with the other two aldermen.
Okay.
That BB should not be part of the...
So we want to strike subset B?
Yes. So
Okay. So I'd like to see a quick show of hands. All those in favor of striking subset B, where we discuss menu expansion or required minimum type of entrees to pre-existing restaurants. All those in favor of striking?
Yep.
That's unanimous.
Okay.
Any other line items for this point?
not at this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
I
Alderman
think
Bessetti.
in the same way we went through B, I think if we give them guidance on A, subset A, where it says the sale or transfer, because I think we're all in agreement that that's something we want in there. Just to kind of round this down.
So with how it reads now,
How it reads now, okay.
Alderman Bessetti.
Let me state it a different way. So I guess section B, the way it is written now, it says for a restaurant that has been restaurant or establishment, which means it includes things that are not restaurants, that has been operating in the city for a minimum of 2 years.
We voted on that. You're talking about subset A. What are you talking about?
Just BB, just regular B.
No, we're over that.
The red
we
area.
Voted past this.
we voted.
I thought we were going to talk.
I thought we voted that we were going to have discussion on that.
Okay, so you want to discuss
That's the part
this
I
now?
have a problem with on this thing.
Sure, let's go for it.
So I think we need to change the wording in that if we want to allow businesses that are only a bar to have a G1 license.
But this isn't for
Because
bars.
the way it's written, it allows it.
It also allows a banquet hall or a hotel.
Right.
So revise it. Provide suggestions, please.
I believe it has to do with the type of liquor license that we have. And that maybe if they have what are these? A class A1 or a class A2, where they have to have a restaurant, would be good, but an A3 would be no. There would be it would be a bar, and I don't believe that A3 should have this. So that's one part. And I thought there was another part in here that we have farther down that limits us on hotels and all that other stuff.
Alderman Bessetti, the A3 is already in the original ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can't just go removing it from section B of an existing establishment. We can't do that. It's part of the primary ordinance.
Okay, then my issue is with the primary ordinance.
That's what we're trying to get.
That's so what you want to do is remove A3s from any new establishment, any new entity that would fall under an A3 or any pre-existing.
Any pre-existing
But it's also for new establishments with the primary
establishments
ordinance.
as well. No A3s, period.
Any discussion from council on that? Not my ordinance.
Mr. Mayor, typically have not done this in a long, long time, but with all this discussion, can you just refer this back to staff? Let us talk to each of the aldermen, try to bring something back. I'm not trying to cut off discussion, but I've actually asked for a third color on my notes because I'm all over the place. But
If staff can expedite this
I
with
will.
some clarity,
we'll
that would
bring it
be
back to the October cow,
welcome.
and I will have notes from the discussions. I will not use aldermen's names, but let me put everything back down, and hopefully we can make this a little easier.
So with a show of hands, I would like to see all those in favor of allowing staff to connect individually with each alderman to take points and make some expedited growth and progress. It's unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Sonoyka.
With some of the motions that we had at a previous city council meeting, we do have a G1 license in flight, and we have other, and we are currently suspending all new G1 licenses in order to make sure that we're good to go. Will we need to modify those motions in order to be able to accommodate for the additional staff, one-on-one staff and alderman time to take care of these updates?
And we would modify those at the next council meeting when they arise.
Right. My feeling is hopefully, I mean, I'm out a bunch, obviously, in October, but that's a different issue. But I want to bring this back at the October cow with all the notes, so then we have it. And you are correct, the two that are still working, one is closer to finishing up. But the two that are very current, the third one that is still in building permits. But again, we do have another one that came before the city council, and they are waiting for a decision. So my feeling is I'm working to get this to the October so we can get this all in all the conversations. And again, I've not done this in a long time, so thank you, and I understand what you're saying, but I'm trying to make this as quickly as I can.
Alderman Sonoyka.
Question for staff. Is there anything that the city council can do in order to expedite this process, such as having a meeting in the future within this month that is not on a Tuesday, that is perhaps on a different day during the week where we can only cover this one item and straighten it out sooner?
So my feeling is, again, we're already calling for folks to come in for budget meetings. So my feeling is between the budget meeting and then also getting people back in for additional time, I should be able to get that all done. So I'm trying to watch everybody's time, but also comments. And if someone also wants to send me an email, and then I have those comments before I sit down with them. But obviously before the October 17th Committee of the Whole meeting, we will have our first round of obviously one-on-one budget meetings. But I'm trying to get this done as quickly as possible, and then with some of the other thoughts that I have on my sheets that are growing.
And with all due respect, I appreciate your consideration of our schedules, but we all did sign up for this, so we're happy to come in when needed. There is one signature on the sign-in sheet on this subject, and I am going to call that individual, Teresa Budmatz. You could state your name and your street.
Yep. I'm Teresa Budmatz. I live on Benton Street in Palatine, which is within Rolling Meadows city limits. And thank you. I was really wondering if I was really going to get up here. But actually, my only reason for being here is to talk about what Alderman Veneziano spoke about and what my husband spoke about as well. And that is the amount of signage that is in downtown area from Daisy's and some other places out, yard signs, sidewalk signs. We're starting to look like Las Vegas. And I don't mean just them. As my husband mentioned, there was a huge billboard advertising the Red Apple and their video poker on Plum Grove Road, and it's really distasteful. And so I really hope that you guys will do something about that in this ordinance.
Noted. Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you.
And on the brighter side, let's move on to line item 3 with tree lighting location part 2. And this is going to be for Joe Ellen and Ms. Cizak. We have props.
When you go to my office, I always have stuff, so you know.
You can have that if you'd like.
You like gifts?
Ready?
Yeah,
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Just to give you a little bit of a background, I'm here tonight to talk about the holiday tree lighting relocation. Talking with Manager Krumstrock before the meeting, he suggested I didn't dress festive enough for the occasion, so I borrowed a festive item out of his office for our use tonight. So thank you for that, Manager. I think a lot of this discussion first started before I was actually with the City of Rolling Meadows. I think you had a discussion back in May for the first time. And it centered around the fact that the historical place for the lighting ceremony had been at McDonald's, and they had some construction there. The tree got damaged, and we started to have a discussion about whether there should be another location. I think it was confusing for people to know whether that was a celebration for McDonald's or the city, so it seemed to be a good time to have this conversation. And like most things that I get introduced to in the city of Rolling Meadows, I just kind of have a conversation, pass by, hear people talking about pros and cons. I get involved, and then now I'm here. So I want to step through some of the things that we've talked about. Lori has been obviously the historical person that has a lot more data on this than I will, so she'll be available to answer any questions that you might have about that. So let's just real quickly review what the desired site attributes for a festival or an event for tree lighting in the community. Originally, when we looked at it, we looked at visibility along Kirchhoff Road. We wanted to also have this wow factor, and I haven't seen this. I'm excited to see this, but apparently when the mayor, gives the word or flips the switch, I don't know if that's physically or just kind of sentimentally, all the lights go on in the community at one time down Kirchhoff Road, and that's apparently a pretty cool thing. So if we can continue that tradition, that would be cool. I know the Public Works guys are probably thinking you should not be providing that picture to you guys, because I'm hoping it doesn't give you an idea and that they're going to have to construct this thing. But that is not our mayor, and it is just a picture. So some of the other attributes that we looked for was access to public parking. Obviously, we want people to attend the event and have ease in finding places to park and walking to the event. The location of the facility and of the property capable of handling a large crowd. We liked it on Kirchhoff Road because it's proximate to all of our retailers, and I know I'm guessing McDonald's loved having it at their location. I'm sure they sold a lot of hot chocolate for the night and cheeseburgers. So other vendors in the area would also potentially benefit from a Kirchhoff Road location. We also needed to look into electrical needs for the properties. Everywhere that we looked at, we tried to evaluate if additional improvements were required. Property ownership was an issue. We obviously first and foremost looked at properties that were either owned by the city or publicly owned. There are some privately owned properties that could potentially be good sites, but again, we need to get approvals. And we're getting into October. I mean, for all practical purposes, we're in October, and we really need to be making some decisions if we want to put a plan in motion. We also looked at the proximity to Route 53 and seeing if we could draw people into the community through this event, and then just generally looking at whether the location makes sense. As I said, I kind of got involved or passed by one day when a conversation was happening about this project, and they were weighing the pros and the cons, and we really kind of came to the conclusion that there's really no Kirchhoff Road site that meets all of the objectives, especially when we considered the council's concerns about the site across the street from City Hall and wanting to keep the option open for that property to be for sale for private development. So we started thinking outside the box and seeing what other things might be considered, and we did come up with a couple of ideas. We looked at the Carillon location is the best central location, but if you get behind the Carillon, the slope goes down, you kind of lose that visibility along Kirchhoff Road. So we started talking about, what happens, is it even possible to develop something on or around the Carillon, and is that faux pas? Would that even be something that the city would consider doing? A good idea, but I don't think we really have time to vet that through this year. We also looked at locations on City Hall property. We could, especially if we're looking at a artificial tree, we could put it somewhere on the parking lot. The city seal on the ground in front of the monument sign in front of City Hall on that hard corner would also be a good location. Again, policy issues. I'm not sure whether that's something the city council and others would find acceptable or not. Another really interesting site that we looked at was the IDOT-owned property that's on the corner of Route 53 and Kirchhoff Road. It's owned by IDOT. We do have an agreement with them to maintain that property, and we do maintain that property, so I'm sure we could plant the tree, but in terms of having an event there, IDOT probably would have concerns about liability, insurance, and we might, again, be able to address those issues. I'm not sure that would happen with IDOT in time for this year's event. So kind of looking at all those things, and we did go through all of the other sites, and if you're interested, I can run through those. But my intent is to have you focus on 2 sites, and to think of 2019 as an interim or a temporary site, which will just kind of get us through this season and spend a little bit more time looking at some of those outside-the-box concepts that we identified above. So the 2 sites that we're going to propose to you, one is a Kirchhoff Road site and one is a non-Kirchhoff Road site as serving that possible interim role. So let's talk about what our tree options are at this point. Lori was able to work with some folks and identified the availability of a 27-foot live Norwood spruce tree that we could purchase, transport, and plant in whatever location we ask them to. And the cost for that tree and its relocation and planting would be $3,600. To outsource the decorations for that particular tree, we have a quote from a vendor that we have used for some of our other holiday decorations of $9,600, and that will kind of carry through on a couple of the other alternatives that we've listed. It's a big tree, but we did get a quote from them. So if we plant it somewhere, for example, on the vacant property kitty corner from City Hall, and you have concerns about that tree staying in that location and its impact on the desirability of that property for private development, we have a quote to relocate it for $2,000, and they can move it to whatever location that we decide. My concern about that, a 27-foot tree is a very large tree to transplant and probably has difficulty surviving 1 transplant, let alone 2. So it's not something I'd recommend, but it is a possibility that we're throwing out for your consideration. The second kind of tree, so we can lease an artificial tree that's also decorated. And I know, I just had an artificial tree for the first time 2 years ago after telling my family that we will never have anything but a real tree. So it can be a personal issue for a lot of people, but I can tell you that a lot of the quotes that Lori was looking into are very attractive. They've come a long way. Think about some of the malls that you go to. A lot of those trees are artificial, and they're quite lovely. So we have a lease for a 24-foot artificial decorated tree for $23,000, a little over $23,000, again, from our contractor that we've used for holiday decorations in the past. That includes the installation, the decorations, the takedown. Storage is in there because they have a lease to own option with that fee, and they would store it for us, insure it, and then do any maintenance to the tree that might be necessary if we executed the lease to own or an annual lease option of the same tree. The other option is we could purchase a 24-foot artificial decorated tree. And again, these are a couple of examples. We could specify what we really wanted the tree to look like. But generally, Berry Landscaping has quoted us that the cost for that option would be $37,325. That includes the purchase of the tree, the first year installation, decorations, takedown, storage, any maintenance. And then any year thereafter, it's only $9,500 to put it up wherever you decide to locate that tree. So again, provides a little bit more flexibility if you want to put it in one location this year and move it to another location next year. Part of the conversation that we had, and I know, the decorations and the holiday spirit continues to grow a little bit every year, is that we could really look at kind of providing you with a multi-year comprehensive look at what your holiday decoration for the community could be down the road. So certainly an artificial either lease or purchase could be part of that plan in any location. So those are the tree options. I want to move on to the 2 recommended locations that we're talking about. Again, understanding the limitations and your concerns. We do recognize the concern that was expressed about this space, but looking at all of the other factors, such as the location and parking and accessibility, it is a really good location. And if we look at it as a temporary or an interim site, we can put the tree there. We can move it to a new location. We can go with the artificial tree, which comes down and doesn't impact the marketability of that property. So it checked a lot of the boxes, and we felt we were justified in bringing that back for your consideration. It does continue that wow factor that we talked about with, all of the lights on Kirchhoff Road coming on at the same time. The other thing that I think is pretty neat about keeping a Kirchhoff Road location is your spaghetti dinner tradition is one that's continued in the community for a year at the fire station property. With the construction of the fire stations, this could very well be the last year that tradition, we'll need to find a new location for that next year anyway, but could be a nice, send-off of that tradition. Obviously, the cons of that location, as I mentioned, is that the City Council is very interested in making sure we don't do anything that will impact the marketability of that property. And I think we have the ability to do that with this option, with moving the tree or selecting a lease option. So here's the cost, the total cost of that option. So we would need to purchase the tree and transplant it. For the live tree option is $3,600, as I mentioned. The contract decoration is $9,600. The necessary electrical work would be $3,500 for a total live tree option across the street at $16,700. I will note that is with the contract decoration of the tree to something similar to what you saw in the images. In the past, I believe our Public Works Department has installed lighting or whatever other types of holiday improvements on the tree you'd like. So, we could look at the $7,100 option would be the minimum to purchase the tree and do the electrical work, and some additional money to buy lights or decorations. So that is an option. It is the least expensive option at this location, however. So the live tree option, if you like this location, would be the least expensive. If we go with a lease option on the artificial tree, the price increases by about $10,000 to $26,825. Again, the benefit of that is you don't encumber the property for future purchasers of that property for private development. The downside of it is you don't have anything when you don't have a commodity. You lease it, you give it back. There's nothing to show for it the next year except the electrical work. You could decide to lease one the following year if the property hasn't sold, and we could have that repeating expense. Again, that purchase option gets a lot more expensive. So if we purchase it and put it in that location, the total cost in this year would be $40,825. Again, we own the commodity, and we would take it down, store it, and we could put it anywhere next year for the options. The one thing that I want to mention about this site that's unique and not available in the other site, and we had our legal counsel check on the potential use of TIF funds. As most of you know, this property is part of our TIF district, and so we asked our TIF legal counsel from Storino, Romello, and Durkin to confirm for us whether this would be an eligible expense, and it is. Mr. Berry stated earlier in some of or I don't know if it was Mr. Berry or our finance director stated earlier that we have some issues with that TIF fund where it's upside down for now, but we expect it to be flushed at the end of that term. So we might need to figure out how and when it gets structured into the payback, but that is a possibility that we could consider that at this location that would not be available at our alternate location, which I'll discuss now. So as I mentioned, we decided to focus on one Kirchhoff Road site and one non-Kirchhoff Road site, and the the one that we thought met or checked a lot of the boxes that I identified in the first couple of slides was the historical museum grounds. Again, a lot of history with this site. We have, our Kimball Hill home built there, our museum's there, it's publicly owned. There's plenty of property for a crowd to assimilate there, plenty of parking across the street. The spaghetti dinner could still happen, but we'd need to find another location, such as the school or some of the other options nearby. The site also happens to have a really nice tree that you can see in that image that we could either, again, have professionally decorated by the landscaping, so that $9,600 professional fee comes up again, and the electrical work that we identified at that location would amount to $2,500 for a total expense of $12,100 for that location. As I mentioned when we talked about the live tree decoration by Public Works, that $9,600 could become something less. And if you provide us with that direction and some general budget that you want us to stay within, we could ask, to get some quotes and do whatever we can with the money that's provided. So real quickly, this outlines both of the options side by side that I just stepped through. And I'll note again, those live tree options provide a range. So the live tree option across from City Hall can range from $7,100. That's for the tree purchase and the electrical work that's required. It can go up to $16,700 if we want the contractor to do all of the work. On the historical museum site, we need to spend at least $2,500 for the electrical work, and then up to $12,100 for the professionally decorated tree. That concludes what I have for you. Unless you want information on more of the sites, I have more slides to show you some of the pros and cons, but hopefully we can focus on these two sites and get some feedback.
Thank you for providing the presentation and the figures that go along with them. It's quite comprehensive. Alderman Bessetti.
Yeah. Thank you. Excellent presentation. In looking at the dollars involved and everything on this, it seems to me even if we get the live tree and it dies the next year, we're still winding up in a better position than doing anything with an artificial tree. This is what I'm looking at.
Okay. That's one way to see it.
It's actually funny. I actually had the opposite thought of that. Is I assumed the worst and it was going to die, and we didn't know where we were going to be in option 2. So I like the Kirchhoff Road corridor option. I'm not opposed to that, but I was thinking if we went that way, and that's what I was scribbling here to make sure, making my notes from the review over the weekend too, is that I think it gives us more options to go artificial tree if we're going to stay along Kirchhoff. If the decision's made to go to the Historical Society on Central, that's a no-brainer. I think we can use the great tree that's already there. But if we stay along Kirchhoff, I would recommend the purchase of a false tree. Reason being, it's a big upfront cost at about $40,000. But if I did the math right, every year after that, it would be $9,500. So the difference between the roughly $40,000 and leasing a tree with the additional cost at about $25,000, our ROI we would already be taken care of in 2 to 3 years. If it's $9,500 a year over 3 years, that's roughly $30,000. So the tree would already pay for itself after the 3rd year and give us more options to locate it someplace. That's just my thought.
And Manager Crumstock, back in 2018 when we were working on our 2019 budget, we didn't foresee any of this. But I do remember having conversations about dollars in the budget for additional decorations along Kirchhoff Road. So can you remind me by chance how much money is available in our current budget for this year?
So roughly there's $2,500 in for holiday decorations, but what we also did last year is that the Community Event Foundation actually purchased some of what we saw last. So again, if you come up with a number, the $2,500 is in the city budget, but we can also go back to the foundation, everything else. And as Assistant Public Works Director Carlton stated, if you decide for that one, some of the work can be picked up by the TIF, and at a later date, the general fund can be picked up on that point. But again, there's about $2,500 in for holiday decorations.
And we know that for positive that we can eventually get reimbursed through the TIF. For
Yes,
any
that's why
dollars
we
spent.
went back to the city attorney who deals with our TIF, and he said electric and the tree, because it's considered landscaping, is considered part of TIF eligible.
Okay. Alderman Cannon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Unbeknownst to me, something happened today that might be interesting for people to understand. A friend of mine and a friend of the city of Rolling Meadows made kind of a generous offer to me today. So I went over to his house. He has approximately a 35-foot tree and a 50-some-foot tree that he's willing to give to the city. All we have to do is dig it out and replant it wherever we wanted it, whether it be McDonald's or whatever. If we put it in McDonald's, I would point out to everybody we got the electricity there already, so we wouldn't have to spend the money. If it died, that would be unfortunate, but at least we wouldn't have to spend $3,000 or $4,000 on a tree. It would only cost us whether to transport it. I have no idea how much that would cost. I'm guessing hundreds. I don't know if it would be thousands. I don't know.
And mentioning McDonald's, do we know if we have clearance, if that were an opportunity that council was willing to pursue, or would that be something we would have to?
We have to go
clear
back to
with
we have to go back to McDonald's folks too, because remember last year their contractor damaged our trees, so that's part of the negotiation. Maybe they would pay for the move, who knows? But we have to go back to corporate.
Okay, I think that's a.
So just
idea
FYI,
worth
too, we're not
exploring.
talking about moving. If this is right on the border of our city, so it's right across from the courthouse. The trees are there right now, so we're talking about less than 2 miles.
So you're saying in the middle of the night, just.
No, I'm not, nothing shady here. Nothing shady.
All I would say is we would want to take a look at the trees first,
absolutely.
because we did have a resident that was willing to offer a tree, and we thought we had it sewn up, but our forester went out and looked at it, and it was not viable option. So.
I completely understand, and I have pictures of them just if you want to look at them before we go home.
Alderman Sineka.
In the event that Alderman Cannon's connection does not follow through after the forester reviews the tree, of these options that we have available to us, can I have clarification from staff that our limit is $2,500?
In the budget right now is $2,500 to do the lighting.
Mm-hmm.
However, again, as I stated, if the council wants me to look for additional money, I would have to look at something, but that's not what I've been asked to do. But the foundation still has some money, and that's how we bought some of our holiday decorations on Kirchhoff Road last year. But I don't want to say that there's a lot of money in the foundation, too. So if you want to get, but we would also look, maybe someone would donate or something else for this event, too, but it's short term, too. So in your mind, think $2,500. The one thing that we've talked about is if you get a tree, if it's not in the TIF area, we could look back in the Public Works budget for some of our tree trimming that we're not done, but that budget's almost done. So there is more to look at if you want, but it's not really holiday decorations other than the $2,500.
You have a follow-up?
I do. If we were to go for an artificial tree option, do we have space to store this? Alderman Cannon is grunting and laughing.
Space for anything.
Right now, we would not really have the space, and if we did find it, it would be really temporary, and that's why we've had that discussion about Fire Station 16, that we have our own space needs that we like. So the answer is right now, it would be an extremely difficult fit, but if we did buy it, we would find somewhere to protect it. Definitely not at City Hall. But old PW, or if we move into Fire Station 16, like we said, for temporary, we would move it to protect it.
Joellen, you had a comment?
Yeah, just a couple clarification points. Two things. One, the quote that we provided you does provide for the storage. So just so you understand that, we could maybe have less expense if we could store it somewhere on site, and we can certainly check that. The other thing I wanted to note, in addition to the $2,000 or the $1,200 we have in the budgeted amount, because of the damage that was done to the tree from McDonald's, we did secure a commitment from McDonald's to provide us with $2,000 as kind of a donation for that damage. So we could consider adding that to our budget as well with your authorization.
Alderman Kennan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Alderman Snike, I apologize. I didn't mean it to be rude to you. That was just a general comment. We don't have storage for anything. But I want to explain to people who are relatively new to the council, the $2,500 Barry's talking to, we go out and buy new Christmas lights every year. It's not prudent for us to try to save them, because if you remember, if you do your own tree, the light burns out. You can about pull your hair out of your head trying to figure out which lights burned out. So we usually buy new lights every year. So that $2,500 is just to replace the things that we get every year and then some. But it's not really new things. Last year, there was a proposal made to buy new Christmas lights, and it was turned down, unfortunately.
Alderman Diastis.
Thank you, sir. Kind of along what Mr. Cannon was saying, could we not just buy a tree if those didn't work out and plant it at McDonald's where we have the electricity and everything else? Is that? I mean, because I thought about that when I read this and thought I have to ask the question.
So that was one of the areas that was discussed by the group. They did talk about just going back to McDonald's because we have it. And I'll be very candid by, even with, we have an intern in City Hall. He called it the McDonald's tree lighting. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to say at a later date, how do you put it as a city tree lighting? But if you want to go back there, that was part of the discussion. We already know everything that goes on. We know the overtime that deals with Kirchhoff Road. But when the committee really came back and they heard me say I didn't want to be here until 10:30, and I'm almost going to bite on that, just really come back with two decisions. And that's why you heard about property across the way or on Central.
Alderman Veneziano.
So, question for Mr. Horn. If Public Works was to do some of the decorations instead of the landscaping company, with some of the supplies that we have and then having Public Works do that, what kind of cost, and I know it would be an estimate, do you think that would be?
I would be really guessing. I know that we've been talking about trying to contract out some of that work because it is an enormous amount of work to try and do in a very short time frame. We also have other work that is occurring where we can't use the specialized equipment for just the crew putting up the tree lighting during that time. We really would prefer if we could contract it out, but we understand if the dollars are not there, Public Works will get done whatever the council needs.
Alderman Budmeister.
Not to be a wet blanket, but I really like the idea of going to the Historical Society. The electrical work that we would do there, would maintain value at that property. We could use it over and over again as long as that tree is alive, and it brings the citizens' attention to probably in my opinion, underutilized facility. So I would ask us to consider that use of that facility as well. I know there's not going to be as much bling along Kirchhoff, et cetera, but this is a valuable part of our city, and I really think that it's a nice idea to spend $2,500 in electricity so it's there whenever we need to use it in the future for anything else, and the tree's already there, so I think it's a win in a small way. Not to mention the cost is very low, but it's actually a win for that area of the city.
And right now it is a temporary option that we're looking to satisfy. And there's space next door for parking as well as spaghetti dinner if arrangements needed to be made. And then eventually there is a new fire station being erected down the street where you could have cartage, whether it's a sleigh ride or just a bus, taking people to and from for spaghetti dinners. Alderman Sinoika.
I would agree that I am in favor of the Historic Museum grounds location with the current quote that we have before us, which shows $12,100 for the electrical work of $2,500. I would also request, and we can take a straw vote on this for staff to determine how much savings we could potentially have if we use Public Works staff instead of the contract decoration through Beery, B-E-A-R-Y.
And then prior to that straw vote, I do want to put a straw vote out there to see if staff should explore Alderman Cannon's proposal from the friend of the city and of your friend for relocating a tree. So if we're at a point where discussion's over, we can go ahead and do straw votes to make progress. Alderman Cannon?
Just one point, Mr. Mayor. I understand what we were talking about, moving it down to the Historical Society, but if the purpose is that he had the most people see the tree, most of the people on the west side of 53 will never see our tree if we have it down there. This is a matter of fact. That's not negative. I'm not.
Sure.
It just no one's going to see it there. The kids that go to Rolling Meadows High School, that's great. And the people who live down there, that's fine. But if it's the purpose is for the most of the community to see it, that's going to probably be not a very viable location in general.
Okay. Yeah. No,
Thank you.
2 points. One, it's a very valid point. But should we still have staff look into relocating their tree?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. And then the other one would be talking about this current location and investing here. So, Alderman Veneziano, before I go into the votes, I'll let you speak. Go ahead.
So to kind of go off of Alderman Cannon, that I think for budget-wise, the museum makes perfect sense, but it's for one event. And like he said, the kids at Meadows and the people that live on Central and a lot of residents in my ward would love it, but that's who's going to enjoy it, and not all of the residents of Meadows. Where if it's on 50 or on Kirchhoff, the whole city gets to enjoy it. That's my only reservation on this, not having it centrally located.
Okay. Alderman Veneziano.
I'll make it brief since the time. I would agree with Alderman Veneziano. It is just 1 year. And we do, for example, this year we had our, I don't know, was the block party or whatever on Central Road. And to me, it seemed like there was just as many, if not more people at the block party this year than there was in past years when it was on Kirchhoff Road.
Sure.
So I don't know that it would necessarily be a detriment.
We may be surprised.
Either way, we could be surprised.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I'm saying.
All right, so with that, I'd like a quick show of hands to let staff know whether or not they should continue exploring the opportunity to relocate a residence tree to another location. All those in favor of letting staff explore that? That's 6 out of 7. Those opposed? Thank you.
And Miguel, that's to any location. Like it doesn't mean down. It's any location
Just
to be determined later.
explore the tree's viability, and then whether or not, from a cost perspective, it makes sense. That way, we have that information. That's all. And then to move forward with further direction for staff. Quick show of hands to see if staff should go ahead and look into the Historical Society for price of installing electricity and making this a temporary location and getting more factual data behind this. Those in favor? Those opposed? Okay. So the majority is in favor. 2 opposed.
So just for clarification from that last vote, so we will be moving ahead with talking to the Park District about Park Central. We'll be talking about to some of the others about moving the
logistics.
Yes,
correct.
And then obviously everything that we're going to be putting out is that we have a new location just for this year because we're already ramping up for the December.
It's October.
I'm just being clear so everybody understands we're moving that way.
Absolutely. Thank you. Is there any conclusions you want to make?
Maybe just one other thought. I know we'll check the viability of the tree that the resident is donating. Is there any interest in the other spruce tree that we identified to locate it in a place that we think might be a long-term situation, such as the location on 53 in Kirchhoff, so that it becomes potentially a future candidate, or at a minimum, just something that people see off of 53.
Sure. And was that the $24,000?
No, that was
24-foot tree.
That was $9,600.
$9,600.
$9,600, or no, $3,600 to purchase and plant the tree, and do nothing more with it this year.
Mm-hmm.
We could, but it will be there next year. I mean, we could still decorate it this year, but my thought would be, since we have such a great potential for that and we can do it on that site, it would set us up really nicely for next year.
Okay. With that point, Alderman Sonoyka, you have your hand up.
I just want to clarify then that if we're looking at the spruce for future years, that we're then also looking at the Friend of Rolling Meadows tree for future years as well.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yep. Absolutely.
For location, you mean? Like
for a future location, yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say sort of the same thing. Mr. Cannon said they have 2 trees, so
they're willing to give us both if we want.
Yeah, so you might be able to put
that one those
In
first.
one spot and one in the other spot.
So we'll let staff connect with this individual and
Okay.
allow conversations to occur, and if they want to get rid of 2 and we can relocate 2, you'll bring that information back
We'll
to
pick the
us.
best spots, I promise.
Wonderful.
Okay.
We have no doubt about it. Alderman Bessetti.
Okay. My question is actually for her, and I was wondering if we go with the 53 and Kirchhoff location, where are people? How are we going to get the people there?
So, Alderman Bessetti, as staff, we've talked about, as the mayor alluded to, potentially getting a sled, getting a shuttle, but we've talked about that, but we didn't want to go ahead with any bookings that we need to do, but we already thought of logistics. We're not UPS, but we did start thinking about that.
Not ready for this year.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Wonderful. Alderman Cannon?
One last quick
Sure.
comment.
This
You
is
know,
our
near
time.
the date of the ceremony thing. You know, the comment was in here that the Community Events Foundation looked at this about moving it to a different day or time, and it was turned down. I would strongly recommend that people are on that committee go to Palatine, go to Elk Grove Village, and see what they do. Because to say that they would have less attendance is a fallacy. Those towns have humongous events. They also have them a lot earlier in the year than we do. You know, we're the last town around that celebrates Christmas. Everybody else does it before Christmas, before Thanksgiving or Thanksgiving weekend. So, I mean, we're way late to the thing. If you go over to Woodfield now, I think they have Santa Claus come the first week of November now, I believe. So I would just ask them to look before they just make an opinion, to go out and actually look and see what other people do, because everybody else is having a lot of success having it on Saturdays. Thank you for listening.
Mayor, can I just ask for one quick clarification? Obviously, Public Works is going to come back with the cost of decorating the tree by the museum. But can we also look at giving you a staff report saying what that cost would be? So then if someone decides that they want us to go back to Berry Landscaping and actually do their professional job, and they do a beautiful job. If you have not seen some of their decorations, go to Wheeling because they take care of that area. That's why, and obviously our new decorations were from them too, but it's going to be a staff report. So
Yeah,
it would
whatever
not
is
be,
the fastest or best mechanism to convey this, absolutely. So we can move on. Yep. That would bring us to line item number 4, which is a waiver of bidding requirements for Lot 5 drainage improvements. Director Horn, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. I promise I will go very quickly as soon as my presentation comes up. This item is in the 2019 capital plan to perform some site grading work, excavation site grading work on what's called Lot 5 in the city. It's the area of, I guess you would call it parkland, which is just east of Salt Creek and west of the Jewel, I think it's called the Rolling Meadows Shopping Center, which is highlighted there in yellow. The second slide, if you take a look, is the topography of the site. I'm indicating with the green arrow what's called compensatory storage. It's not a drainage, it's not a detention, it's not a retention pond. It's basically just a hole they dig to compensate for development and impervious surface, which was done to the east of that location. The area, as you can see from 2014, was very heavily vegetated up by the Park District maintenance shed up there. It was full of trees, overgrown buckthorn, kind of like tree weeds. It was just very heavily vegetated in 2014. All that plant material was removed at the direction of the city in 2015, I believe. And when we removed all that vegetation, we exposed what you see in these two photos, which was just huge amounts of broken up concrete curb and concrete debris and things like that. So I think it was November of that year, we excavated all that concrete that was viewable by the residents who are just west of the creek. eliminated all that, regraded the slope that was originally identified, and planted it with native seed mix. I guess that slide's not in there. So what we found is the area that's immediately south of the community garden and around the compensatory storage area is starting to expose some of that similar material. And what we're finding is there's very large ruts and sinkholes that are developing in areas where we find that pedestrians are very often walking. So we felt it was important to try and remove that and correct that liability. The area identified by the red is where the heaviest concrete has been viewed. And the area identified in orange is primarily the compensatory storage basin. What the project proposes is removing all the concrete in those red areas to a quantity that we can afford, and then regrading those areas and the area within the orange to eliminate the rutting that has occurred in that area so we can maintain it with a large mower. And then the contractor would come back after he regraded everything, and he would establish that area with native seed mix. It's a more appropriate mix for a stormwater amenity, and it would blend in nicely with the seed mix that we planted immediately west of the community garden. The reason I bring this up, or bring this to the council's attention, is when staff met with the engineer that we were considering using for this project, just to get a general idea of what the cost would be, we got an estimate back that was upwards of $50,000, which is 40% of the money we had budgeted. So in talking to the engineer, we realized there was an opportunity to maybe do a design build option, which is whereas we would work with the engineer and interview 2 or 3 potential contractors who would give us unit prices on the excavation of the concrete material. And we would simply have the engineer monitor the excavation to make sure they were pulling out the material we wanted pulled out. And once they got to a certain quantity, which would allow them to finish the job, we would tell them to stop. And then we would backfill the area, compact it with good solid clay, and then obviously grade and put in the native seed mix. But at the time of the discussion, it did not make sense to me to have this project engineered for, I think it was $34,000 or $35,000, just so it could be bid out to basically pay a guy in a machine to dig out concrete. So certainly we will we would work with the engineer to solicit competitive proposals from contractors that we know are qualified for this job. But again, I did not want to pursue it any further than this without getting the council's feedback, because obviously city ordinance requires that anything over $20,000 be publicly let. So we didn't want to proceed with that without your direction to do so. And that is what the direction request is at the bottom of the memorandum.
Thank you. Sure. Any questions or comments from council?
I would just say from my side, Mayor Gallo, thanks much, is that I've already actually talked to Mr. Horn about this. I've had a few residents call and say, can we get some of this stuff cleaned up and improve the view? So I think that's the only question I have, Director Horn. Once this is all said and done, and I know it was a security thing, because you and I had that conversation a few months ago and I got the calls, do we know, is vegetation going to be higher? Will there be some type of obstruction, for lack of a better term, between the residences there and the shopping center? That's the intent down long term?
Yeah, I agree. It has opened up the back of the shopping center to those residents. I will say we had a multi-year plan to do landscaping in the site, but because of the rutting and the concrete, we can't plant any trees in the areas we want to plant them. There's I don't know if this thing has a laser pointer or...
It does. It's just the green doesn't show.
Oh, there you go. Oh, Jerry. Well, in any event, there's the green. There's about a 10-foot buffer between the parking lot and the compensatory storage area down, where we're actually considering planting kind of like parkway trees that would grow up, and we'll mix deciduous and non-deciduous trees. Again, the plantings that were there when the problems were there was just an overgrown hodgepodge of mess. These would be, we would plant these in appropriate locations and make them look nice for the community.
Great. Thank you, Phil.
Further comments from the council? Alderman Cannon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess my own feelings is I wouldn't mind you getting rid of the concrete there. I guess the question I would ask for, almost every town that has any kind of water body around them makes it really a beneficial feature of the city. But we really don't do much with our little path there. Could we think larger than this and do something a little bit more dramatic to make it just throwing some seed down and make some other plants grow? I mean, is that really solving anything? I mean, it's getting rid of the concrete, fine. But I mean, it just seems to be really a minimal thing, and it seems like it could be a better area, in my opinion.
And potentially we could look into that, but it was always my intention from the beginning to give some native plant material a chance to do it right and to show the council how nice it can look. It would be very nice in this location, especially as we continue to try and help the garden club improve the community garden to be nicer. I would agree. That's why we wanted to tie the two areas together in hopes that we could continue that to the south. But again, it's a council decision. I agree that the area is kind of just a void space. So I'd be open to anything, I guess.
Okay. Alderman Veneziano and then Alderman Budmats will follow up.
Kind of following up with Alderman Cannon, I did receive a lot of feedback last week from the senior luncheon that the garden club was wanting that garden to be much improved, that it's lacking in quite a bit. I didn't go into details. I don't have a green thumb. So I did say that I would relay that message. So any help that we can get them, whether that be getting rid of the concrete or vegetation, I know they would appreciate it.
That was part of the issue, too, is we wanted to, the former Alderman Banger kind of led the charge on developing that and wanted to expand it to the south. We realized that we needed to put in some nicer, more modular fencing that could be moved. There's just no way to sink any kind of significant material in that ground. It's so full of concrete.
Alderman Budmats.
So the question is, are we sure that it's just concrete, and are we afforded some protection when we do hire an engineer so that in the event that they find something else that is other than concrete, hazardous or special waste that's been dumped there over the years, what happens if we run into those particular problems and we don't have an engineer on site protecting our interest? Are we opening ourselves up for liability?
So what I would say is I would not propose doing it without having an engineer on site. That's kind of the part of the engineering I would not be in favor of eliminating. We would also require what's called CCDD, contaminated disposal of debris, something like that. We would require that be in the bid, in the proposal by the contractor, so we had a set unit price. So if we did run across that, we would have a unit price that made sense. It wasn't astronomical. And again, we can do some preliminary engineering if we wanted to do some soil sampling. Certainly we could do that. It probably wouldn't be a bad idea, but again, I was just trying to see if I should even pursue this. I don't want to spend any time pursuing this if the council's dead set against it. So
okay. Barry?
Really quickly, Mayor and City Council, and obviously Alderman Diastis will remember this, that there was a long period of time, there was a whole dispute who actually owned it, and the old property owners of the development over there, we actually did purchase it. And part of the reason that we did purchase it is because there was no upkeep. There was dumping. There was all kinds of issues that were going on there. And go back in the Wayback Machine when we did get it, and Public Works Director Rob Horn was hired. He was actually tasked with trying to make it look cleaner, and this is just one of those items. But we did talk about doing soil borings to see what we would actually find down there, but we didn't want to do any money allocation at this point in time until we knew how everybody felt, because again, it does take the mayor and the city council to do a waiver to even proceed the way that we've been talking about.
Okay. Alderman Sunoika, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's late, so I just want to clarify again what exactly it is that we would be waiving, because it sounds like we're still going through a bid process.
A bid is when you advertise in the newspaper and you create a full set of engineering drawings that they would then use to submit a sealed bid by a certain date and time. We're going to seek out proposals from construction companies that the engineer has worked with and are qualified to do native seed mixed installations, and that while their proposals will be competitive, they will be hand selected. They will not be advertised to the public.
Does that help?
It does. Can you remind us again what the benefit of not making this public would be? Because typically, if this is public, we're able to see who the lowest bidder can be for us.
And I understand that, and we certainly would provide you with the 3 proposals, and you could select that way. The reason we're requesting to not do the bid or asking the council to consider that is because if we do the bid, then we have to do the engineering. We have to do a full set of engineering drawings that are required to do the bid to give out to the contractors to bid. That's the part of it we're trying to eliminate from having to spend. Because I don't mean to interrupt. Normally, I wouldn't even propose this, but because there's only about 3 to 5 pay items that we're even considering, it doesn't seem a high risk to me to bring it to you for consideration.
If I may follow up.
Sure.
So, and then I want to clarify then what was mentioned earlier about an engineer being on site. Then that is not a consideration for the bidding process. That engineering is its own category, and it would.
Correct. We would scale down what their scope was, but yeah, chances are it would be somewhere between $10,000 and $15,000 to do the observation. We want to do that to make sure that they're charging us for what we're asking them to do. They're not just hauling out dirt and charging us an astronomical fee for that. And to make sure if they run into, as Alderman Budmatz said, if they ran into contaminated soils, that we measured that accurately. And then, most importantly, to not take out more material than we can afford to finish the project. So again, there comes a time when we, if there's 20 feet of concrete, we're not going to dig 20 feet down. We might dig 10 feet down and then compact soil above it enough to make it safe for, 50 years or 100 years, whatever it would be. So,
any further follow-up before I request a straw vote? Seeing none, I'd like to see a quick show of hands for the council authorizing a waiver of bids and the direction to identify and work with an engineer and contractor on a modified design build project for this Lot 5. All those in favor? Show of hands for yes. 1, 2, 3, 4 in favor. Were you in favor, Alderman Sunoika?
No, I have follow-up, I'm afraid.
Sure. Those opposed? 1, 2. 2 opposed. The majority has in favor.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. This brings us now to line item 5, which is Code Section 2-53, censure or expulsion of alderman. Alderman Budmatz, you're up.
Hopefully this is pretty self-explanatory. If there's any questions on why we wouldn't move forward this, I'd love to entertain them.
You want to give any backstory for the audience at home?
The backstory for the audience at home is that in the past there was a situation where an alderman was censured at a meeting after the actions which he was accused of occurred. It seems to me that if that was going to happen, that we're all, as aldermen, entitled to due process and a chance to defend ourselves and know what's coming our way. So censure that or expulsion that happens for actions that occur during that meeting are reasonable. For things that don't happen during that meeting, it's reasonable that everybody gets notice that they're going to have that kind of thing coming at them. So that's all I'm looking to provide is due process and reasonable notice to anybody who's going to have to answer to one of these charges.
Okay. So then, is there any discussion on this, Alderman Zanoika?
I would just like to have some follow-up and clarification from our city attorney that aldermen cannot be expelled from the council indefinitely per this.
For that meeting. It's only for that meeting.
I can help. I brought a copy of ILCS 65 ILCS 531-40-15, which says the City Council shall determine its own rules of proceeding and punish its members for disorderly conduct. With the occurrence of 2/3 of aldermen then holding office, it may expel an alderman from a meeting, but not a second time for the same incident. So the answer is that we can only expel somebody for one meeting. Thereafter, they're welcome to come back. Otherwise, there probably wouldn't be anybody in other city councils. They would have just gotten rid of each other.
Any follow-up, Alderman Zanoika? Alderman O'Brien?
Thanks, Mayor Gallo. And this might just be a point of clarification. This is applicable for staff or interacting with the public, too, is my understanding. That's what I wanted to get some clarity around, because it says obscene or insulting language to or about any member of the council. Just my personal thought, I don't see any of us doing that, being in the positions that we are. But if it were to ever happen between a council member and a staff member where it got lewd or obnoxious, or a council member and a member of the public during the open session, should we include that it's not just council person to council person, but it's anybody taking part in the meeting? Is that if Nick and I have a disagreement and it escalates to that level, it should be treated the same way as if I get into a heated disagreement with Mr. Whitney sitting in the public. I just think it's unprofessional on everybody's part, is that we shouldn't just police ourselves as a council for interacting with each other. It should be any part of the meeting. If we're interacting with Mr. Horn when he's doing a debrief or one of the chiefs, I think it's more than just us, but that might be out of the bounds of what the state law, the ordinance is. That was just my thought, is we should encompass anybody as part of the meeting, not just ourselves. So that would be my only request of this week, is insulting language to or about any attendee of the meeting versus any council member. It should include that we're disrespectful to anybody. I'm open for thoughts or, hey, that's crazy.
Just from my reading of the ordinance as it stands, this does include any kind of behavior of the council member that would be lewd or disgraceful. It doesn't. That is not limited toward another member of the council.
So that says that to or about any member of the council?
Correct.
That doesn't limit us where we can be a jerk to Chief Valentino and get away with it.
So that would be disgraceful, a disgraceful manner, or, categorized as.
I'm glad you didn't choose me.
And, there are three components. Be an alderman acting or appearing in a lewd or disgraceful manner, or who uses obscene, insulting language to or about any member of the council, or who does not obey the order of the chair. So, you can clarify that to include, as long as we're limiting it to the conduct of the council members.
At the meeting.
During the meeting.
Correct.
Okay, if that's the intent, I'm okay with that. If that's everybody's understand. It's fine as written then.
Any further comments or discussion points on this? So,
yes.
Can
we get out of here?
Sure. So, quick show of hands. All those in favor of moving forward with this?
Thank you.
That's unanimous. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So motion.
That's first by Alderman Cannon, second by Alderman Budmetz. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well.